The eerie blue light particles were suspended between the horn-shaped curved door frame. A boxy texture covered every inch of the doorpost and gave it the feeling of a unique artifact. In this disc-shaped space buried 2 kilometers underground, Jiang Chen, Golovan I, and Lilith, who followed behind them, were escorted by the 2 soldiers of the Celestial Trade in Golovan as they headed to the platform where the portal was placed. For billions of years, has it been left open like this? Jiang Chen asked while he stared into the deep vortex between the door frames. At this moment, he was wearing the heavy N-100 power armor. No. When we first came here, there were only 2 posts here. Gorovan shook his head. It's just because the selected person is standing here, the door leading to the center of planet opened. Really? What kind of principle is this based on? Jiang Chen said with a smile, if something happens to that person, isn't the secret of Gaia civilization only left to the gods? On this point, maybe even the gods don't know. I guess only Gaia can answer you, Golovan answered, without emotional fluctuation in his tone, as he walked towards the door. Wait a moment. Jiang Chen stopped him. Is there anything else? Golovan turned his head and looked at Jiang Chen. Before going down, shouldn't we throw down a detector? Jiang Chen asked. Golovan thought for a moment, then nodded. That makes sense. Jiang Chen gave him a meaningful look. Perhaps it was his illusion, but his attitude was clearly telling him that they already know what would happen next. The spherical detector was transported down from above. The small detector was widely used to search for devil worms' nests. It could easily pass through the narrow underground cracks, detect the surrounding life signals, record the ambient temperature conditions. The most important feature was that the information it collected could be compiled into Klein particle waves, which could theoretically be received on the surface through thousands or even tens of thousands of kilometers of rock formations. Jiang Chen took the small ball from the soldier's hand, weighed it, then threw it into the portal. A strange scene happened. The moment that small metal ball touched the eerie blue surface, it was like a stone thrown into the lake, swallowed by the azure blue water, and disappeared from this space. The soldiers who stood behind Jiang Chen all showed a look of surprise in their pupils that were hidden behind the tactical eyepieces. The expressions on the Golovan soldiers wearing carbon nanocombat uniforms and laser rifles in their hands were no different from their leader Golovan. Under the shroud of Golovan mental system, their knowledge and thoughts were shared with each other. It's magical, isn't it? Jiang Chen said after he readjusted from the sudden shock and laughed. You will see more magical things below, Golovan said without any expression on his face. The situation on the opposite side of the portal was quickly reported back from the spherical detector. After they confirmed that the situation below was normal, Jiang Chen invited Golovan with a hand gesture, then followed behind with Lilith to the portal. The portal was the same principle as the neutrino tunnel. At the moment Jiang Chen passed through the portal, he felt the same sense of time and space dislocation similar to the feeling of using the interdimensional bracelet. As he tapped on his watch and read the string of data that emerged on the holographic interface, after he confirmed that the area was safe, Jiang Chen finally began to examine his surrounding. It was a spherical space with a longitudinal area about the size of 2 or 3 football fields. The surrounding walls were wrapped by unknown metals. It was hard to imagine the resistance of these metals against pressure and high temperature. A series of tubular tunnels extended from the surrounding to the center of this spherical space. Some of the tunnels were transparent, some looked like load-bearing structures that connected the wall with the metal spherical shell in the center. As for the location where Jiang Chen and others were now, it was probably in one of the tunnels, near the edge of the spherical space. Just like what he suspected, the temperature here was not high as the theoretical estimate of thousands of degrees, at least not in the space built by the Gaia civilization. There was no life signal around, so it was likely that the place had been abandoned for many years. It was surprising that this place survived the baptism of time. Jiang Chen looked to Lilith behind him, then back at Golovan. Have you been here before? No, I just read it from old files. It's a pity that it's not us who received this place. Golovan shook his head. The us here probably referred to the CCCP. Before the space colonization ship Svetovid took off, CCCP, PAC, and NATO all explored and excavated the relics of Gaia's civilization, to the point where in the decade before the war, several local conflicts erupted here on the surface of Mars for this reason. Jiang Chen heard Lin Lin mention this information before. There is the planetary furnace. Atoms are disassembled into the quarks, then fired to the center of the furnace through a particle accelerator. The disassembled particles are stacked layer by layer and then compressed through the pressure of the entire planet. This is the so-called planetary forging technology. It sounds simple, Jiang Chen said with a smile. Disassemble atoms into quarks, and then use the internal pressure of the planet's core itself to compress the disassembled particles into the range of strong interaction forces. Just like building a house, stacked in circles, it was the basis of strong interaction materials. It was only possible to find a small amount of naturally occurring materials with strong interaction forces in the depths of the planet's core, billions of years old. Theoretically, there was no stronger object in nature. But it is quite difficult to achieve. Before the particle spacing reaches the range of the strong interaction force, it will receive exponentially increasing repulsion as the spacing decreases. You can imagine connecting broken magnets through the original point of fracture. I see, it seems that I oversimplified this. Jiang Chen laughed. The production of strong interaction material is roughly equivalent to crushing magnets into the size of rice grains, then turning the magnets into the size of a building. In fact, it is this technology that ended the Gaia civilization. Golov and I turned around and looked at Jiang Chen. Let's not talk about it, give it to me, and as agreed, we will help you solve your problem. What should I do? There is only one thing to take away, Golov and I's finger pointed to the front of the pipe. At the deepest point, was the metal sphere connected by metal pipes. If the entire spherical space was a factory, then that was probably the furnace. I can't put the connected things into the subdimension, Jiang Chen said. Then separate it from the particle accelerator. As Golov and I spoke, he walked forward. He stopped at the end of the pipe, extended his right hand, and imprinted it on the metal sphere with the circular dent. The light blue light particles followed his palm and spread towards the metal spherical shell. A look of surprise appeared on Jiang Chen's face. Before he realized what was going on, he heard a SSSSS-like leak. The pipes connected to the spherical furnace were like the antennas on an old radio and started to shrink layer by layer. Because it was located in the very center of Mars, the entire furnace floated in mid-air as if there was no gravity. Golov and I read the surprise in Jiang Chen's eyes and explained. There is no language in Gaia's civilization, and it can't even make sounds. They rely on telepathic communication. And in this regard, we happen to be experts. After a pause, he continued. Now, it's your turn. What do you think is in that thing? I don't know, maybe there are still some unfinished materials. I see, Jiang Chen nodded thoughtfully, then pressed his hand against the metal sphere. The metal touch permeated through the carbon nano handguard of the power armor and into his palm. As he focused his consciousness on the palm of his hand, he took a deep breath. The next moment, the entire furnace disappeared in front of the three of them, like a shadow that was suddenly snatched away. Then, as agreed, very good. Without any warning, Golov and I suddenly took out his pistol and pointed it at Jiang Chen's back. Ping! Almost at the moment the gun was fired, a silver-white blade flickered, and blue flames sparkled in the air. The metal bullet was cut into two pieces right down the middle. And the expressionless Lilith already stood behind Jiang Chen's back. Countless silver needles descended from the air, and with the sound of the needles breaking the sound barrier, they swooshed in Golov and I's direction. However, the silver needles didn't hurt Golov and I, instead they collided against an invisible shield, and only left transparent ripples in the air. This is really troublesome. Golov and I sighed softly, looked at Lilith who stared at him emotionlessly, and lowered the pistol in his hand. With his back still facing Golov and I, Jiang Chen did not turn around but spoke softly. Can you give me a reason? This is the best result. You have already lost. Golovin, I said calmly, from the moment the Earth fleet was defeated. No, I reminded you a long time ago that you have no chance of winning. Is that the reason for shooting me? It's just an anesthetic. Even after he just backstabbed his ally, Golovin's eyes remained calm and collected as if he was stating an obvious fact. By the time you wake up, you'll find yourself aboard the Svetovit. Then become the guinea pig in the lab. I never asked you to let me on the ship, Jiang Chen sneered. Just tell me, what is your purpose? Planetary forge. Get some more before you leave. I don't deny, or rather, our purpose was that from the beginning, Golovin, I said calmly, we can make a deal. Do you think it is possible? Jiang Chen looked at him, with viciousness and coldness in his eyes. Do you still have a choice? The silence between the two lasted for a while. Then, Jiang Chen suddenly started to laugh. His laugh was very delightful. No. To be precise, it was very carefree. After all, he made a choice like this. His mood could not be described as cheerful. Golovin, I looked at him in silence. There was a trace of confusion in his eyes that had never appeared before. When it seemed that Jiang Chen had laughed enough, he stopped. He then slightly lowered his gaze, so that Golovin I could not see his eyes. If it was just now, there really is no choice, but now, after he paused for a moment, he used a nearly hoarse voice and squeezed the words out of his throat one by one. Just now, I suddenly understood the meaning behind that gift. Golovin, I was taken aback at first. For an instant, the face that hadn't shown any fluctuation of emotions suddenly changed. Almost at the same time, Jiang Chen shouted loudly. Lilith. Roger. The silver short blade popped out from between the sleeves and the expressionless Lilith's petite figure was like a cannonball as she leaped towards Golovin I. This is Guards 1, I'm being attacked by the Golovins. I repeat, we're being attacked by Golovins. Inside the ruins, the not-so-wide space was filled by the dancing bullets. Celestial Marine soldiers stationed at the entrance of the portal were caught off guard by a sudden attack from their allies. Fortunately, these soldiers were all elites in celestial trade, and they responded immediately. The original friendly atmosphere was replaced by shock and anger. The celestial trade marine soldiers, inside power armors, moved with their backs against the mobile cover. They raised their electromagnetic rifles and fired back against the Golovin soldiers' laser weapons. Among the corpses scattered on the ground, some belonged to the Golovins while some belonged to celestial trade. What exactly happened? With disbelief-filled eyes, after Hong Zue heard the report from the front line, he smashed his fist against the table with force. He didn't understand why the Golovins would stab them in the back right now. Is there any benefit to them? He didn't know anything about the deal between Jiang Chen and Golovin I, and he couldn't understand the intention behind Golovin's actions. However, there was no time left for Hong Zue to hesitate. Since the opponent already fired the first shot, it meant that a war that could not be more foolish had already started. There was nothing to lose anymore. It was surprisingly easy to make this kind of decision that should have been difficult. With a self-deprecating grin, Hong Zue took a deep breath, and the expression in his eyes was replaced by fortitude. He pressed the holographic window at the corner of the table and connected it to the missile force from Heavenly Palace City. Launch the ballistic missiles, target, Svetovit City. Roger. In Heavenly Palace City, a shrill alarm sounded. The missile launchers drove out of the garage and raised the cuboid missile nest. With the plume of smokes that fired forward and backward simultaneously, the dozen-meter-long missiles took off one after another, as they headed in the direction of Svetovit City and their space elevator. Golovin's land-based short-range missiles immediately lifted off and intercepted the ballistic missiles launched by Heavenly Palace City. Clusters of flames exploded above the desert. Like magnificent fireworks, they announced the rupture of friendship between the two sides. Hong Zue stared at the image on the holographic screen and he clenched his fists tightly. Obviously, the other party had already expected such a day. In other words, they were preparing for this day since a long time ago. However, To everyone's surprise, Golovin, who was threatened by the strategic strike, did not launch a counterattack against Heavenly Palace City and even ignored the civilian transport ship leaving the port from Celestial Trade's space elevator. They only launched short-range missiles that intercepted the ballistic missiles. Perhaps in their eyes, these things destined to be destroyed were no longer worth their ammunition. Containers of supplies were sent along the space elevator to the synchronous orbit, and the Svetovid was in the final phase of preparation for the upcoming voyage. At the same time, rows of guns of different sizes on the ship were aimed at the faraway Heavenly Palace City, shrouded by the graviton barrier. Obviously, the Golovins had been concealing their true strength. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, Hongzue, who stared at the picture on the holographic screen, couldn't believe that there were so many guns hidden on the harmless starship. However, at this moment, an unexpected change suddenly happened. In the direction of the asteroid belt, bug ships waving their tentacles suddenly appeared out from the deep and gloomy universe. At this moment, the deadly gaze from light years away finally approached the gate of Earth civilization. These bugs always seemed to surprise people. After they just ignored the space colonization ship that had just passed through the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars. More than 30 bug ships and countless splitters had already arrived on the battlefield. After the clock ticked forward by half a century, the countdown to the end was pushed ahead unreasonably by 3 days. The rain dripped on the window eaves. The coconut trees outside the window were blown violently to one side by the howling typhoon. The wind and thunder raged in the air. From the distance, a fishing boat sailed through the rough sea. Surprisingly. Now, there were still people who didn't know what happened, and they still lived a routine life day after day. Koro City was already in chaos, and so was Penglai. It was not only a scene in Xian, from Nouveau York to Shanjing, all the cities sunk in the dusk before the apocalypse. Most people had already given up. In any case, it was impossible to board the ship without a ticket. Apart from offering blessings or curses to those who had already boarded the ship, there were only a few things left to do. The devoted followers chose to overcome through the last moment with their gods. Some people spent the last moment with their family to enjoy the Last Supper. The self-defeated people exchanged their money for alcohol, or things they never dared to try before. At this moment, there seemed to be nothing worth respecting. The future of this planet was just like the storm outside this window, cloudy, depressing, and suffocating. Sun Jiao stood in front of the window, watched the storm outside, and let out a soft sigh as she moved her finger away from the cold glass. The happy moment was so short. She didn't expect that after such a short encounter she would have to say goodbye to this beautiful new world. What is the best way to describe this? These 4 years has been like a dream. Xia Xiu walked behind Sun Jiao and looked at her back with some worry in her eyes. Then she said softly, "Are you worried about him?" To the surprise of Xia Xiu, Sun Jiao smiled and shook her head gently. She read the unexpectedness on Xia Xiu's face and explained in a quiet voice. "I believe his mood should be the same as mine." "The same means?" "Of course the mood when I want to see him." Her right hand gently stroked the slightly bulging belly as looked down at the little life growing inside and said with a smile, "He will definitely return to me, so there is nothing to worry about." This is really enviable. There was a defeated expression on her face, and Xia Xiu sighed lightly. To talk about the question of whether to be jealous or not, jealousy already disappeared 3 years ago. She didn't mean anything related to jealousy, she simply envied the happy smile on Sun Jiao's face. If the person who was pregnant with the small life was herself, then the expression that made people's hearts tender would definitely appear on her face. "Have you checked whether it is a boy or a girl?" Xia Xiu changed the subject. Sun Jiao shook her head. "Why don't you take a look? If you ask Lin Lin, she could do it." Because, with her eyelids slightly lowered, there was a touch of gentleness that was never seen on her before that lingered at the corner of her lips. "I want to share the joy of that moment with him." Xia Xiu wanted to say something, but at this time, the sound of helicopter propellers roared from outside the mansion. Aisha jumped out from the helicopter, walked into the house quickly, threw her raincoat on the hook by the door, and wiped the rain off her face. When Xia Shiyu saw her walk in, she immediately walked up and asked with concern. Are things arranged? SS Origin has set off, and the target is Alpha Centauri. It will enter radio silence after leaving the Earth-Moon system. Our people are already on board and will contact us after the end of hibernation. If it is necessary at that time. Really? Xia Shiyu looked at the sky outside the window. Behind the heavy dark clouds was the last hope of human civilization. Fortunately, they did not need to bear this difficult mission. She sighed and then said. We should set off too. Regardless of the end, he would wait for them on the other side. On SS Origin. A man with a square face, full of resolute, stood in front of the transparent floor-to-ceiling window with his hands behind his back, as he stared in the direction of Hua. At this time, an old man over the age of 70 walked behind with a cane. The sparse white hair on his head told the vicissitudes of the past. Lu Xianghua, the head of the well-known Lu family in the capital, was not as young as when he was 10 years ago. Not only the Lu family, but even the Wang family, who had got on the wrong side of Jiangchen, were also placed on the list. No matter how fierce the internal struggle was, at least in the eyes of outsiders, they were united. Of course, it was irrelevant to discuss these issues now. No matter what their status was, from the moment they boarded SS Origin, everything was no longer related to them. Take a few more looks, you won't see it in the future. We will come back again. Come back again. At that time, I'm afraid that the Lu Manor won't be the same Lu Manor. The old man smiled and shook his head. A trace of reluctance flashed through his cloudy pupils. But in the end, he shook his head, said nothing, and dragged his dying body towards the hibernation room. Los Santos, in a marble mansion by the ocean, a drunk man was kicked off the bed by a long, tanned leg. It hurts, it hurts. Hiss. Jennifer. What are you doing? A new way to say good morning. Damn it, we missed the flight. You liar, didn't you say that you have a ticket? You also said that an aerospace plane would come to pick you up on the ship. The messy-haired Jennifer jumped off the bed and grabbed Robert by the collar. Her bloodshot eyes were filled with menacing red lines. I didn't lie to you, did you want the ticket? Let me look for it, he did send me one. You liar, you don't even know Jiang Chen. The president of Celestial Trade used to buy arms from you. He also went through the Iraqi desert with you. Oh. God, I should not have believed those rumors. Robert's words cannot be trusted, you're full of lies. Burp, found it. Robert took out a crystal card from under the pillow and rubbed his messy hair while he muttered, I can't believe I threw it under the pillow. I already said I don't lie to women. Jennifer leaped forward and violently snatched the crystal card from Robert's hand. Don't do this, babe, it's just a ticket stub, and I already sold the identification chip in it. I asked that generous guy to let me keep this thing as a souvenir. I want to treat it as a family heirloom. For my daughter, or son. What Robert wanted to say was that even if you took this thing to Celestial Trade, SS Origin would have already flown away. You sold it? Jennifer was stunned. Yes. Robert nodded earnestly, a smile that he thought was quite charming appeared on his face. I sold it for a good price, and a generous rich man was willing to buy it from me for $50 billion world dollars. I have already contacted Forbes and they will consider placing me on the next issue of the world's richest people list, and spend a whole page to introduce me, the new billionaire. Next issue? Are you an idiot? Will there be another issue? Jennifer said desperately while she avoided Robert's hug. She punched and scratched his chest while she said, You stupid fool, you said you love me, but one ticket could accompany one adult and two minors. To be honest, Jennifer didn't love Robert at all, and the reason why she agreed to be with him was so she could get on SS Origin. But now, Robert just told her that he sold the ticket, just to exchange for a pile of papers that could be worthless by tomorrow. He has gone insane. There will be, trust me. Roberts put his hand on Jennifer's shoulder and smiled, because now the owner of Forbes is me, I bought them. It was not just money that depreciated. There were company stocks that depreciated faster than money. You lunatic. You're unreasonable. Jennifer cussed it out while she grabbed a piece of cloth, draped it on herself, stormed out, and slammed the door. She left so fast that she even forgot to put on her underwear. Actually, it did not matter. The end of the world was here, why still care about that stuff? Hey! Don't do that, I'm not kidding. *T, you will regret it. I swear. Robert yelled out as a last attempt to convince her to stay as he watched the supercar drive off from the window. When he saw that the car did not come back, he shook his head helplessly. *K. My new car. Is it here already? I see. Jiang Chen ended the communication. Just 2 minutes ago, Harmony's fleet arrived at the synchronous orbit of Mars. Perhaps in a mere hour, the space colonization ship the size of the moon would pass by this place. He was no god, just a mere mortal. In any case, there was no way to preserve Heavenly Palace City. After he gave it some thought, those people, when they were still human, they were much stronger than their compatriots living on Earth now. Solar flares, tidal locking, mutants ravishing. The fact that they rose to greatness from that environment already explained a lot of the problems. They made sacrifices of being human, chose to merge with unknown genes, armed their weakest part, and continued their civilization on a planet where the electronics industry did not work. Although he did not agree with their approach, their determination was indeed respectable. If he was not willing to sacrifice anything, he was doomed to get nothing. He knew better than anyone else the value of this planet to the Earth civilization. But if he did not do this, the fact that if the Earth civilization could continue on was in jeopardy. This kind of struggle is meaningless. Gullivan I, who lied in a pool of blood, said in a hoarse voice, even if you destroy this colonization ship, there will be another one. Cracks were visible on the pipes around the place. From the chaotic aftermath of this battlefield, it was easy to deduce the fierceness of the battle. There was a knife cut across the waist left by a sharp blade. Although the carbon nanosuit was made out of memory material that quickly repaired the cut, the large amount of blood loss and the cut that was difficult to heal pushed him to the last of his breath. As for Lilith, half of her body had been destroyed by laser weapons. But since her main body was not in this world, no matter how many bodies she destroyed, Lin Lin and her sisters would always have a way to build a more convenient one for her. That's also something that'll happen a century later. Jiang Chen shrugged as he responded to Gullivan I's question, then he looked at the emotionless Lilith on the ground, nodded, and said softly, "Thank you." Lilith blinked as if she asked, "Did I do well?" "The gap between you is more than a century." A big mouthful of blood gushed out from Gullivan I's mouth. He stared at Jiang Chen, with a rare trace of fear from deep inside his calm pupils. "Give up and we will take you. You can choose to disembark where you want to rebuild your home. If you use simple addition and subtraction to measure the progress of civilization, then why are you lying at my feet now, and not the other way around?" Jiang Chen glanced at Gullivan I, who laid in a pool of blood, for the last time, turned around, and reached for the center of the pipes. In the next instant, the planetary furnace reappeared in its original position. "If you don't give up anything, you won't get anything." As he muttered those words silently in his mind, Jiang Chen took out the gift that had been given to him by the void from the storage dimension. 1 gram of antimatter. But there should be 1 kilogram now. The real difficulty in preparing antimatter was not the production, but storage. Even to this day, Lin Lin was unable to come up with a better solution. Although she could manufacture a larger magnetic confinement device to store as much antimatter as possible, the figure was unable to break through the unit of grams. Later on, because of the poor stability of the magnetic confinement device, it was too dangerous to continue research on the surface. The neutrino technology solved the problem of the portal, so Lin Lin simply suspended this unrealistic research project. Therefore, even if the main engine of the Earth fleet was replaced with the warp engine, the energy core was still the second-generation nuclear fusion generator. Now that he thought about it, maybe their intention was not for him to develop antimatter storage technology with such a large technological span. The faint blue magnetic confinement body was filled with bright blue light, as it shined like an incandescent light bulb. This magnetic confinement device was shaped like an hourglass, although it only stored 1 gram of antimatter, its storage limit was 1 kilogram. Perhaps the antimatter that was originally sent to this world was 1 kilogram. It was just that, 999 grams of it were consumed on the way here. His left hand was pressed against the place where Golovin I had previously pressed, as he focused his consciousness on his palm. After a while, a familiar voice came from deep in his mind. "Stop it, the inheritance that we have spent tens of thousands of years to create, billions of years to preserve, and now you want to destroy them all. After we die, no one will remember you again." The consciousness lodged on the planetary furnace fell silent. After a long time, a circular inlet slowly opened on the side of the metal spherical shell. Through the film-like interface, Jiang Chen could see the mercury-like liquid flowing slowly inside. It should be the unformed strong interaction material, which was disassembled into quark masses. When the metal spherical shell opened, there was a plea in Golovin I's eyes. "I beg you to stop. I'm sorry." With a sigh, Jiang Chen stuffed the magnetic confinement device that shined like an incandescent lamp into the inlet of the planetary furnace. The battle began. The rain of missiles, bullets, and lasers all over the universe was like stardust that decorated the black canvas. Almost as soon as it observed these worm ships, the Svetovid immediately turned all their weapons and unleashed their firepower on the bugs. At this moment, the Svetovid, which had wandered in deep space for many years, finally unveiled its hidden power. The azure blue laser bombs fused together in the gloomy universe. The hit spitters died in large chunks, and the hit worm ships were splattered with blood. The mass projectiles, along with meteorites and asteroids, formed a torrent of metal in the dim outer space. A fleeing Seagull-class transport ship was hit by a Klein particle ray, and the engine was instantly extinguished before a worm ship bit onto its side. Another 2 worm ships collided into the spaceport and the space elevator respectively. Amidst the screams of one after another, poisonous spore mists, tentacles, and mutated soldiers were released into the spaceport. Celestial trade soldiers stationed on the spaceport engaged in a fierce exchange of fire with the mutated soldiers released by the bug ship. However, the resistance did not last long. Under the poisonous spore mists, the mutated soldiers were almost invincible. Even if their hands and feet were blown up by rockets, the hideous wounds would heal quickly in the poisonous spore mists. And the ordinary people who inhaled the poisonous spore mists quickly became the living Diodoro. The sky was obscured by the dazzling light. Even the sun and the countless stars were robbed of their brilliance. The celestial trade marine soldiers stationed in the spaceport detonated the nuclear fusion generator, and the 20 kilograms deuterium and helium, 3 tanks in reserve, were all pushed into the reactor. The heat-resistant reactor was vaporized in the next instant by the enormous amount of energy, and it engulfed the entire space nuclear power plant, the spaceport, the worm ship that invaded the spaceport, and the civilians and soldiers who were about to be slaughtered, in the halo of nuclear explosion. The space elevator twisted into an incredible posture, broke into several pieces in the air, and smashed down toward the ground. Not far away, the Svetovid, which had suppressed more than a dozen worm boats at the same time with its firepower, began to emit a bluish light from the warp engines in its back. The Svetovid engine has ignited, and they are evacuating. The officer in power armor walked into the command room, then performed a military salute. "I see." Hong Zoe nodded, glanced at the phone in his hand, and a complicated look appeared in his eyes. However, it was quickly replaced by the perseverance of death. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, then opened them again. "My last command. Fulfill your final mission." "Roger." The officer stood at attention and saluted. There was no trace of fear in his eyes as he walked out the door. "They're coming." The soldiers crouched in the bunkers in Heavenly Palace City watched the strips of flesh-red splitters in the air as their palms that held their rifles oozed with sweat. Their eyes were either filled with excitement, relief, or calmness. There, however, was no fear. From the beginning of this war, there was no need to think about survival. If no one could survive in the end, there was no fear of death. They were only leaving first. A large amount of flesh smashed down from the air, and the tentacles were constricted behind the flesh. The shield generator ran at its limit, and the pale yellow graviton shield surrounded every inch of the entire Heavenly Palace City. Electromagnetic anti-aircraft guns were charged and rocket launchers aimed their missiles at the sky. The tragic flame exploded in the air and colored the dim glow of the sunset into redness. The dense firepower did not stop the bugs from landing. Hundreds of mother nests landed on the surface of Mars, as they swallowed the rich carbon dioxide gas, and at the same time released spore gas to erode the entire planet. Anti-aircraft vehicles and electromagnetic guns exploded one after another, as the anti-aircraft firepower points deployed in Heavenly Palace City were focused by the splitters firing Klein particle rays. The head of the Mutant Countermeasures Department of Heavenly Palace City ordered the shutdown of the ultrasonic fence, as the suppression of Martian creatures such as devil worms were lifted. Devil worms swarmed from deep underground to the surface, as they circled the city covered by alloyed floors. They rubbed their bloodthirsty fangs while they began the hunt for living creatures on the surface. However, even this ancient creature was no match for the powerful mutant soldiers. In the end, their bodies were used as fertilizer for the nest. Lock the vent gates. Burn the farm crops. Turn off the gas filtration system and start the liquid oxygen reserve in the armor. More than 1,000 soldiers were deployed in their respective combat positions. Hong Zewei opened the armory in Heavenly Palace City and handed out the remaining weapons and gas masks to the civilians who were stranded in the city and had not been evacuated and were unwilling to wait for death. If death was inevitable, then it was better to die on the battlefield than to wait for death. The Svetovid had left from the synchronous orbit of Mars, with 20 worm ships in close pursuit. The remaining 3 or 4 worm ships aimed their main guns at the ground. The Klein particle emission organs on the head began to emit a deep red color. Obviously, in terms of shield technology, celestial trade was only getting started. The pale yellow shield did not last for 3 seconds before it collapsed under the bombardment of the thick and long rays. Crowds of mutant soldiers entered the Heavenly Palace station and exchanged fierce fires with the Marines in front of the station. The battle could be described as one-sided. It was a rather stupid choice to engage in a ground battle with these bugs. Their combat effectiveness on land was far greater than their strength displayed in space. There were giant insects with 4 legs, that looked like spiders. They fired red Klein particle rays from cannons on their head that was as thick as a forearm. There were also 2-legged humanoid soldiers, with a rifle connected to countless dark green pipes that fired acid bullets that could almost melt through rocks. The largest number of bugs were a group of humanoid soldiers with scales and lizard tails, which were necessary to balance the weight of the armor. 3 sharp claws grew on their hands and their heads were triangular. Among Harmony's soldiers, this type of unit was likely similar to cannon fodder. However, even the cannon fodder gave the celestial trade soldiers a lot of difficulty. The dark green poisonous spores already surrounded the entire Heavenly Palace City and had penetrated through the corroded pipes. These spores were deadly neurotoxins for other creatures, but for these mutant soldiers, they were the holy light that healed all scars. A soldier crouched behind cover witnessed a mutant soldier covered with scales had its legs and arms shot off. However, in the next second, the fragmented body healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Damn it! The soldier cussed it out, emptied the magazine of the machine gun. Just as he reached for the ammo box next to him, there was a blade aimed at him that directly penetrated the nanoceramic breastplate on his kinetic skeleton, then dragged his intestines and bones. Kakaka, the 4-legged wolf beetle made a strange cry and continued to rush towards the line of defense of the celestial trade soldiers. The mutant soldier that rode on its back brandished a hook-like long spear and quickly harvested the life of Marine Corps soldiers behind cover. Not far away, the Tiger II tank raised the particle cannon, but before it had time to fire, a Klein particle beam turned it into a pile of scrap iron. The soldiers next to it quickly dove to the sides, but they were too slow for the charging wolf beetle cavalry. Blood began to spread from the station. With the slow advancement dark green mist, along with the pipes that were constantly shattered, the enemy was slowly advancing to the center of the Heavenly Palace City, the colonial center. Hongzue watched the swarm of bugs that flooded the city outside the window, let out a sigh, then reached for the pistol in the drawer with his trembling hand. Although he had expected this ending earlier, when it really was his time, he still felt a little regretful. There was only one bullet in the magazine. It was the one he left for himself. At this moment, the earth underneath him suddenly started to shake. Hongzue lost his balance and almost fell down. After he regained his balance with the help of the table, he gazed out the window with uncertainty in his eyes. The second he looked in the direction of Mount Olympus, his expression changed several times in almost 1 second, and finally, he helplessly shook his head. "I hope your choice is right." He muttered these words silently as he continued to raise the muzzle, then he aimed at his temple before he finally pulled the trigger. Outside the window, the ground quaked and the mountains collapsed. Perplexed by what happened under their feet, the swarm's offensive stopped. Not far away, Mount Olympus. The largest extinct volcano in the solar system, at this moment, was spewing out molten hot lava from the inside. Only 13.78 kilograms of antimatter would be needed to destroy Earth. If it was in the core of Earth, this number would be significantly less. Although the conclusion was drawn from theoretical estimates, and there could even be a certain degree of exaggeration, it was still something that could be referenced. If Mars was destroyed, if it was detonated in a planetary furnace, 1 kilogram would probably be enough. Jiang Qin did not have a chance to personally confirm this. When the magnetic confinement device was inserted into the inlet of the planetary furnace, he activated his interdimensional travel and returned to the apocalypse. Then, everything was over. The heat from the core of Mars was transferred here by the metal tubes. It was easy to imagine the terrifying temperature of the unformed quark materials. The metal was vaporized in an instant, and the magnetic confinement, together with the magnetic generating device, disappeared. Then, the 1 kilogram of antimatter released was like a deadly explosive dropped into an oil drum. And it was an oil drum that was burning. The moment antimatter came in contact with regular matter, the energy from annihilation did not blow away the surrounding matter like conventional explosives but instead pulled the surrounding matter and the space itself to the center of the annihilation. A huge amount of energy gushed out so that the space itself collapsed at this moment. The entire metal spherical space, together with the nearby rock formations several kilometers long, was twisted into light and shadow and pulled into the whirlpool of darkness that seemed to be capable of sucking out souls. The enormous gravitational force radiated from the center of the black vortex to the surroundings, as large pieces of rock formations were torn apart, and the magma that flowed was squeezed into an eruption. However, the pitch-black void did not exist for long. 1 kilogram of antimatter was obviously not enough to create a black hole in the true sense, it was not even enough to create a fake black hole. The matter and energy sucked into the center of the black vortex erupted in an instant, bursting out like a slingshot. The real apocalypse arrived. It was the same for the bugs that landed on Mars, the Mars creatures that waved their claws, and the celestial trade soldiers who still desperately resisted the incoming bugs and were fulfilling their final obligation in front of the colonial center. When the Olympus volcano erupted, the surface began to tear apart in large chunks. The already riddled Heavenly Palace City traffic tunnel ruptured inch by inch. The buildings constructed out of steel screamed in agony as the structure was overwhelmed by sheer force. Electric sparks and flying rivets raged in every corner of the city. The sand dunes became abysses, the mountains were scaled, the vast desert rolled like waves, and the entire planet was like a red-hot soldering iron, ushering in its end. Swarms of mutants were engulfed in the cracked gullies on the surface, and the worm ships began to accelerate, as they desperately tried to catch up with the Svetovid's footsteps to escape the whirlpool of death, but it was just a mere hope. The Svetovid increased its engine output to its maximum, and the space colonization ship that was headed to Mars extended its tentacles and flesh membranes to the limit. However, regardless of who, it was already too late in front of the detonated, planetary bomb Euro. 200 million kilometers away, at this moment, Celestial City was deserted. A week ago, Celestial Trade implemented personnel control on this city that floated in synchronous orbit. Entry of non-ticket holders was restricted, and irrelevant personnel stranded in the synchronous orbit was persuaded to leave. After Kelvin watched SS Origin set up, he returned to the Space Command Center, made 2 cups of coffee, and walked towards his seat. "Thanks," his assistant said as he took the coffee. He felt flattered and surprised. "You're welcome," Kelvin waved his hand and sat down on the chair next to him. "You made me coffee for several years. If there is one person that should say thanks, it should be me." Only a few people sat in the Space Command room. After Kelvin sat down, he stopped talking. His assistant couldn't bear the awkward silence, so he spoke up first. "I don't understand, why didn't you get on the ship?" "I'm not married." The assistant was taken aback and looked at him in confusion, not understanding why he suddenly brought this up. "Because this is the other half of my life." Kelvin smiled and cast his gaze on the blue planet outside the window. "If its ending is determined, then I at least hope to be here when the end finally arrives." After a pause, Kelvin looked at the employees who remained in the Space Command room that repeated the same tedious and meaningless tasks, then he continued. "What about you? Why are you staying here?" The hand that held the coffee cup trembled, and the assistant smiled embarrassedly. "What if a miracle happens? I want to tell my wife the very first moment." The two looked at each other and laughed at the same time. Jokes aside, after Kelvin had enough of a laugh, he shook his head, then said, "I want to listen to the truth. I don't know if a miracle will happen. However, until then, I promise you, you will have to go back and explain to your wife why your salary this month was deducted. I'm not joking, I just, really don't know what to do." The assistant's shoulders slackened, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. It was not just him. Among the employees who still worked here today, everyone shared the same mentality. The space observer that sat there repeatedly adjusted the angle and focal length of the space telescope. The correspondent on the left used Morse code to broadcast unfunny jokes to the abandoned Jupiter colonies. But who could blame them? They just wanted to use work to distract themselves, so that the last day would not be so difficult. It was just a pity that Kelvin could not assign them more tasks. At this moment, the observer who sat next to Kelvin, who was playing with the space telescope, suddenly stopped what he was doing, and began to mutter inexplicably. "Do you believe in God?" "Sorry, I'm an atheist," Kelvin said. "A minute ago, I was too." "Then Mr. Stolov, what changed your beliefs?" Kelvin asked with a smile. "Just a minute ago, I tried to pray. Then, a miracle happened." He spoke anxiously, and because he was so nervous, he bit his tongue twice in one sentence. Stolov did not explain more as he responded to the inquiring look from his boss. Instead, he typed a few times on the touchpad, opened the large holographic screen in the center, and presented everything he found through the space telescope. With a bang, the coffee cup fell on the table. Kelvin's jaw dropped wide open as he stared blankly at what was happening on the screen. He was completely oblivious to the burning sensation on his thigh. The employees in the Space Command Center also stopped their work one after another, as they stared at the image in a zoned-out state. "This is what happened 17 minutes ago," Stolov said, as his entire body was tremblingly uncontrollably. "What's going on?" Lin stared blankly at the portal in front of her. The neutrino tunnel that was originally in stable operation, at this moment, was like a shattered mirror, flickering restlessly. Aisha took 2 steps forward, stared at the unstable portal, then frowned. "What happened? I don't know, but in theory, it shouldn't be like this," Lin stammered as she was unable to understand what had happened. At this moment, the flat mirror surface suddenly shattered and neutrinos began to radiate out randomly. The girls were all taken aback by this sudden unexpected situation. They all subconsciously took a half step back while they put their hands in front of them. When the scattered light particles stabilized again, the neutrino tunnel only connected from front to back. As the portal lost the synchronization with the portal in the other world, it was now just an ordinary star gate, and it could only interfere with the time of this world. How could this happen? Lin frantically grabbed the touchpad next to the port as her fingers typed furiously on it. Solar flares? Impossible. Even with solar flares, it's impossible to interfere with the trajectory of neutrinos. All of a sudden, she froze. What is going on? Xia Shi walked behind her and asked with concern in her voice. The coordinate parameters have changed, Lin muttered quietly. In other words, we can't go back. Sun Xiaoro said thoughtfully as she touched her lower lip with her index finger. The room was silent. The girls all looked at each other. For a while, no one thought of a solution. If even Lin could not think of a solution, then there was unlikely another way. Anyway, the neutrino tunnel was closed. Just then, a phone call arrived on Xia Xiu's watch. Hello? She asked when she pressed the on button. This is Celestial Trade Space Department. What happened? When she asked this sentence, the expression on Xia Xiu's face was quite calm. She had already considered the worst-case scenario. However, this calmness did not last for long. The moment she heard the shocking news, the expression on her face completely changed in the next second. Mars exploded. Like Doomsday, the fiery red planet just suddenly blew up. Whether it was the Svetovid, or the bugs chasing behind it, or the space colonization ship 1,000,000 kilometers away, they were all swallowed by the fragments that scattered out in that instant. Especially the space colonization ship whose size was comparable to the moon. Under the gravitational pull, the fragments of the explosion seemed to be capable of pinpointing the targets, as they smashed toward the space colonization ship. The ship that was once invincible in front of the Earth fleet was torn into pieces by the explosive fragments that accelerated to nearly the speed of light. Because the Earth and Mars were at the furthest distance from each other, with the Sun in between, it was naturally impossible to directly observe how spectacular the explosion was. But from the overflowing gravitational parameters and gamma rays that were several times more terrifying than solar flares, the Space Command Center finally confirmed the fact that Mars exploded. At the same time, earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, all sorts of omens like doomsday emerged. Just as people on Earth anxiously waited for the end to come, the official website of Celestial Trade published a piece of news. The space colonization ship of Harmony Civilization was involved in the Mars explosion, and it is confirmed to have been destroyed. If it weren't for the major media that also published this news and the fact that NASA, ESA, and other space agencies that were half paralyzed and half operating confirmed this fact, almost everyone would think this was just a ridiculous joke. No. Even if it was confirmed. Most people still did not change their mind, as they thought of this as a self-deprecating joke. A joke that belonged to the abandoned. Mars exploded. And destroyed the space colonization ship as well. Stop making jokes. Days passed, and the last day became the last weekend and the expected end still did not arrive. It seemed that space colonization ship disappeared into thin air. Until then, those who had already lost hope started to raise their defeated heads and cast suspicious gazes toward the sky. At the same time, they walked to the mirror, re-examined themselves, and found that they could not recognize themselves at all. At this moment worth celebrating, not many people cheered. Many people squatted on the ground regretfully, hugged their heads, and moaned in pain, "Oh, God, Buddha, Virgin Mary, what have I done in the past few days?" Of course, no matter how they complained while they hid in their home, no matter what those self-rejected people had done before the night arrived, no matter how regretful they were in front of the mirror, at the moment before dawn, everyone all rushed onto the streets, and welcomed the new day with cheers and excitement. Only by experiencing death did people understand the preciousness of being alive. Celestial Trade, Space Command Center. Almost all the employees sat here. Many people had worked for 72 hours without any complaint. All of them showed 120% enthusiasm for their work and worked hard in their posts. The assistant helped Kelvin bring a cup of coffee, and after the latter's weary thank you, he sat in a seat next to him. Have you confirmed the cause of the explosion? 2 theories. Both are artificial detonations. Kelvin rubbed his sour eyebrows and said in a relaxed tone. One is that the Svetovid launched some kind of star-detonating weapon to Mars, which used the explosion of Mars to destroy Harmony's space colonization ship. Another theory is Jiang Chen. The president? The assistant looked at Kelvin in surprise. Well, this is mainly because of a video. Kelvin raised his hand, clicked on the holographic screen, and opened a video. The video was taken 4 days ago. Jiang Chen stood in front of the station, in front of the rioting crowd, and said the sentence, "I'm not going anywhere." Kelvin leaned back against the chair, rested his head against it, and looked to the ceiling. Which one do you prefer to believe? I would rather believe the latter, the assistant said firmly. Oh. If the Svetovid really has a star-destroying weapon, the assistant smiled bitterly, why did it not just shoot at the space colonization ship directly? Instead, it somehow got dragged into the aftermath. Kelvin took a moment to think, then laughed. That's true, it seems to make sense just after thinking about it. He just couldn't figure out what exactly Jiang Chen used to blow up Mars. After all, it could not be the bugs that did it, which blew themselves up. After all, it could not really be a miracle of the gods. But the truth did not matter as long as celestial trade could justify itself, then the truth was what they dictated. About how Mars exploded. Let's just use that theory. I need you to go to the Space Institute in Koro University and rush the report on the impact of Mars explosion on the Earth's environment. I'm going now. The assistant immediately got up. The door not far away closed. Kelvin looked at the holographic screen as his finger tapped lightly on the table. He had already thought of a script. Just now, the only loophole in this script was filled in. From tomorrow on, you shall be worshipped as a new god. The way he gazed out into the universe was mixed with a hint of complicated emotion as Kelvin muttered to himself, in a somewhat lonesome voice. This place is. Jiang Chen vaguely remembered that he stuffed the magnetic confinement device that contained antimatter into the inlet of the planetary furnace, and then activated his interdimensional travel at that very moment. However, to his surprise, the place he was in at the moment was not the familiar mansion in the Fishbone base, but a place of pitch darkness. He didn't know how long the desolate black lasted. In that darkness, he felt something approach him like a ghost. It moved closer to his ear before it quickly moved along his hair, and then next to him. You came. You are. We have met each other before. Jiang Chen was silent for a long time, then he asked with uncertainty in his tone. This is the void. Exactly. In the emptiness, the invisible ghost that surrounded him whispered. Why am I here? Jiang Chen smiled bitterly, I remember, I should have successfully traveled back to the apocalypse. His Adam's apple moved slightly, and after a while, he finally was able to squeeze this sentence out of his throat. In other words, am I dead? The invisible ghost laughed. Jiang Chen was certain that it was laughter. It only surprised him that the laughter was not of mockery, nor was there any contempt from the higher civilization to a lower civilization, but rather, it was mixed with a hint of astonishment. The dead can't come here, you can rest assured. After Jiang Chen heard this, his tense heart was finally at ease. Sacrifice himself to save the planet? Stop joking. He was never a selfless person. He had worked hard to manage the apocalypse like his back garden since a long time ago. If the modern world was really unable to be saved, he would move with his loved ones to the apocalypse without hesitation and continue to be the ruler of that world. It was just that, after all, he did like this world a little more, not to mention that there were many things in this world that he couldn't simply just give up. So even till the last moment, he was still doing all he could. Remember when you were in City K? You mean, T-Virus? Jiang Chen hesitated for a moment before he asked. He knew that these remnants of the void could secretly observe this world, but what puzzled Jiang Chen was that he didn't understand why it mentioned this event from his past. Remember that at that time, the Kurofun attempted an assassination against you, and you tried to use your interdimensional travel ability to escape from that dangerous mutant on this side of the world. The voice was like a ghost that surrounded Jiang Chen, but you failed. Jiang Chen's expression changed slightly. He had already guessed what the ghostly voice was about to say. That space colonization ship had the ability through a certain way, perhaps a Klein particle wave or something else, to block his ability for a short period of time in exchange for a price. If it was like this, there was no reason that they wouldn't do this at the last minute. Those bugs hoped to get his ability, but if his ability became an obstacle for their invasion of Earth, of course, they did not mind getting rid of this obstacle. Do you mean, I didn't make it through successfully? Jiang Chen's tone was filled with uncertainty and bitterness. If it was this case, then he was definitely involved in that explosion. Is such that? But didn't you mean that the dead can't come here? Jiang Chen seized the glimmer of hope and questioned the invisible ghost. That's right. The expected answer. But Jiang Chen couldn't understand. If he was involved in that explosion, it was impossible for him to survive. But now, someone just told him that he did not die and that he was still alive. You are really lucky. You have found something by luck that a higher civilization, known as the Type 3 civilization of the Kardashev scale in your comprehension, is using and used it on yourself. The ghost-like voice sighed softly. I don't understand what you mean. You will understand. The voice began to become ethereal. Anyone who has been here will understand. Wait, Jiang Chen was taken aback for a moment, and he was about to ask a few more questions, but the voice walked away from him. Gradually, tangible matter began to emerge from all around him. Like a drowning child, he tried to open his eyes, extend his hands forward and grab the object that was floating in the darkness. However, the moment Jiang Chen tried to do this, the fog that enveloped him seemed to have instantly dispersed. At this moment, he finally saw clearly what were floating around him. A power armor, a kinetic skeleton, a PK-2000 rifle, hummingbird drones, piles of crystals, and even a few boxes of canned luncheon meat from an unknown period of time. This is my storage dimension. How the Fu*K did I get in here? A helpless smile appeared on Jiang Chen's face. But after he thought about it carefully, it was not completely unreasonable. The subdimension itself was an existence between two parallel worlds, while the void was a unified and isolated existence independent of all worlds. The black hole created by the detonation of antimatter dragged him into the void in an instant, perhaps because of the shelter of those ghosts, or perhaps because of other reasons. After the miniature black hole dispersed, he was not brutally tossed from the black hole, but broke through the invisible wall and stayed in the void. At this moment, Jiang Chen suddenly noticed that in his subdimension, there was a light he had never seen before. It was a cluster of goldenness. It was like fused gravel, as the goldenness exuded a faint gleam. What is this? As he muttered out, Jiang Chen reached out and tried to grab the pile of goldenness, but his fingertips easily passed through it. It was like it did not exist in this world, and what remained here was just light and shadow that alternated between virtual and reality. Forget it, let's not bother with this, let's first think about how to get out of here. Although Jiang Chen cared very much about the golden gravel left in his subdimension, there were obviously more important issues that needed to be resolved at the moment. He just sunk into his consciousness and into this place before. He had never put himself in the subdimension before. First of all, it is impossible to go back to the modern world, who knows what was going on there now. In short, let's go back to the apocalypse first. After he passed through the neutrino channel, he reset his coordinates on the modern world onto Coconut Island. After he confirmed his coordinates, Jiang Chen took a deep breath, as he had done countless times before, and silently chanted, "Travel," in his mind. The human instinct to gather together in the face of disaster existed since the beginning of primitive society. Invincible beasts, brutal and bloodthirsty cannibal tribes, floods, rockslides, earthquakes, plagues, pests no matter what kind of disaster, as long as a pulse still remained for the civilization, those who survived were able to dig out through the failures of the past and find the last kindle of fire. Just like what Kelvin had imagined. When the video in front of Heavenly Palace City Station was released, the figure that was not considered burly, but mightier than anyone else naturally became the new deity of the new century. He was recognized by the worshippers from different countries and languages all over the world. His speeches were recorded. His thinking was compiled into a book. His glorious deeds were written into the textbook. His portrait became a flag that displayed directly above the conference hall of the Earth Defense Alliance headquarters. In the not-too-distant future, every major decision of Earth civilization would start from this point. And the man who once saved the planet would continue to fulfill his glorious deed to guard this place with his gaze. Every member that stood here would swear an oath of loyalty to the Alliance and civilization. Of course, these were all events in the future or things that would happen eventually. About a few years ago, he said that he would form an Earth Federation, but a group of traitors who fled this blue planet rejected him. So now, the Earth Federation was established. Koro City, on the lawn in front of the presidential palace. Kelvin stood in front of the podium, raised his head as he squinted his eyes. While he looked up at the gentle sunlight in the sky, he began his remark. A painful victory. I can only use this to evaluate this hard-won Monday. Our civilization should have ended last Thursday, and even a week ago I had taken care of everything, just to make time for the last day. That day, as usual, I went to the place where I worked. You should know that it is called the Space Command Center, which is the heart of the Celestial Trade Space Department and the eyes of the Earth Fleet. It's very unexpected. Many people have also chosen to stay here at this last moment and wait for the ending to arrive. I made a cup of coffee for the assistant who has always helped me, and then I sat in my seat and waited. With the incoming brutality, our civilization was about to be extinguished. But at this moment, a light shined in the distance. Of course, that light was invisible to the naked eye. Our space telescope recorded that moment. When disaster struck, some people chose to leave, some chose to stay, some chose to give up, and some chose to fulfill their mission to the final minute. Their sacrifices are great and lofty. Our civilization has thus turned a new page, rather than being concluded. Here, I would like to dedicate the highest respect to the heroes who sacrificed for the great cause. There was thunderous applause from the audience. The expressions of the people were solemn and excited. The guards of honor played military music, and the soldiers on both sides of the line fired 3 shots into the air. As the white smoke dissipated, the sandalwood coffins were covered with a blue Federation flag. Under the escort of the guards of honor, it was marched through the road in front of the presidential palace and buried in the newly built Mars Colony Cemetery. Of course, the remains of the heroes lying here were not their actual remains. The entirety of Mars was blown into a vast asteroid belt. What laid here, in the wooden coffin under the flag, were photos, clothes, or medals, that were just the relics of the heroes. The heroes' family members were allowed to step forward and bid their final farewells to their departed relatives. Some people bowed their heads in silence, some wept in tears, and some even fainted due to the overwhelming sorrow because they couldn't bear the pain of the death of their loved ones. Some people knelt down and kissed the wooden coffin lightly, while others stood upright from a distance and offered them the military salute of the Alliance. Sadness permeated in the air. However, the sprouts in the soil were full of hope. A woman in a black dress and a veil stood in the crowd. She gazed at the buried sandalwood coffin from a distance, gently bit her lips, while her red eyes seemed to be restraining the sadness that was about to overflow. "You came." A familiar voice came from behind, and the woman turned her head. When she saw the familiar face, she hurriedly looked away, her previously bitten lower lip that also turned white because of force seemed to open, and she said with a voice of sorrow. "I just came to see him for the last time, and I will leave here tomorrow. Don't get me wrong, I don't mean anything else." Xia Xiu sighed softly and changed to a gentle tone, "I just feel a little surprised." The face under the black veil was slightly taken aback. Surprised? Well, I didn't expect that guy would be so popular. When Xia Xiyu said this, her tone seemed helpless as if she had lost a bet. Just when Lu Ya was puzzled about what she wanted to do, Xia Xiyu turned around. Come with me, no matter if you are planning to see him or not, this isn't the right place. After Xia Xiyu finished this sentence, she walked towards the Luer sedan on the side of the road. On the other side of the cemetery, and also on the edge of the crowd. A pretty figure looked at the cemetery with the same complex expression. I won't forgive you. Never. You devil. But for some reason, tears fell as she spoke. Her shoulders trembled as she wept quietly. Perhaps it was because she felt that crying made her too ugly. She raised her hand and wiped the tears on her with force, and with a hoarse and shaky voice, she stubbornly added. I didn't cry. Not far away, under the big tree, the man whose entire face was blocked by the shadow of his hood stood with a woman in a lavender dress. From the beginning of the funeral till now, they hadn't said a word. They just stood there and watched quietly. Finally, the woman broke the silence first. Is it fun to attend your own funeral? The man laughed and started to speak. It's very interesting. How many people in this world have the opportunity to attend their own funeral? Someone is crying because of you. The man fell silent. After a long time, he sighed softly. What do you think I should do? Did I hear wrong? You blew up a planet without saying anything. As a man with such a strong opinion, you're asking a girl like me for advice? Will the sun rise from the west tomorrow? The woman blinked playfully. I'm not kidding. Jiang Chen looked at the funeral with a complicated expression. Well, although I don't know how to help you. Xiao tapped her finger against her lower lip, thought for a moment, then smiled all of a sudden. But I think the tears at the funeral won't be a lie. Chapter 1600 Robert's Lucky Day. My dream is to count cash while lying a pile of cash. Robert laid on a beach chair at a white sand beach that was as white as ivory on the coast of Los Santos. After he put down the glass of champagne in his hand, he said leisurely. Your dream before was not this. I remember it was having Scarlett in your left arm and Megan Fox in your right arm while resting your head on Marissa Miller's lap while she fed you peeled grapes. Nick, in a pair of sunglasses, gave Robert a sideways look and joked. That was only a goal in that phase. There will be many phased goals in one's life. Robert laughed. Now what? It was achieved last night. Not far away, beautiful women in bikinis played volleyball on the beach. The sound of the rustling waves in the distance was pushed forward by the white waves. The sea breeze wrapped in the fragrance of coconut and blew in his face, as Robert watched the turbulence on the sandy beach. He was so relaxed that his eyes drooped. Oddly, he spoke suddenly. Did you know? My friend, until now, I still think that 11 tons of gold are the most successful investment in my life. Isn't it that ticket? Nick asked. No, Robert shook his head and smiled triumphantly. Now that I have thought about it carefully, I was almost sacked by that Mexican drug cartel, and then forced to escape from the FBA and Lockheed Martin's salesman, just to make some hard-earned money as an arms dealer. When did my luck change? It seems from the moment you decided to get out of the business. Nick shrugged. From that moment on, their lives were obviously a lot more colorful. No, man, you are wrong. Robert shook his head and laughed out. There are too many people that retired from the business, such as the Mexican guy that got me into the business. Now, he's on the street next to the Hollywood Walk of Fame making burritos. I go visit him every Saturday, although his food is terrible, so, what you want to say is. From my experience at the poker table. If you always lose money, then you only need to find a gambler who is lucky enough and bet with him. This is a really awful advice. Nick smiled bitterly. In State A, if you do this, you'll lose everything, including your pants. The leisure on the beach only lasted until the evening, but the party continued from dusk to late in the night. Robert took out a bottle of vintage red wine from his private collection in his cellar, carried 2 wine glasses, and went to the balcony. He sat down across from Nick with a grin, placed the wine glasses on the table, took off the cork from the wine bottle, and poured for both of them. "Are you not going to spend time with your new girlfriend?" "New girlfriend?" Robert smiled and shook his head. "When dealing with these people, you can't show that you are more anxious than them. Speaking of, Nick, you should also find someone. The scary thing in Hollywood is not a scandal, but people forgetting that you exist. I have one already." "Really?" Robert looked at his old friend in surprise. "When? I mean, why didn't you tell me?" "I told you several times, but every time it seems you forget." Robert laughed awkwardly, rubbed the tip of his nose, then leaned back against the chair. "Let me think about, a Ukrainian, in my hometown. I remember, the last time you went back to sweep the grave. Wait, was that all a few years ago?" 6 years ago, I plan to take her to Los Santos this year because she wants to come here for college." Robert's jaw dropped. He felt like there were too many things he could joke about, but he didn't know where to start. "Forget it, everyone has a different perspective on relationships." Robert finally shook his head and ended the topic. The two chatted about the past, and they talked about the man. After Nick recollected what he saw at the funeral on TV yesterday, he asked after a moment of silence. "Is he dead? Do you think he is dead?" Robert asked the same question with a smile. "I don't know, but no one should survive that kind of an explosion," Nick said. "I think so too, but my friend, if you think about it from another angle, every time we thought this bastard was dead, he would miraculously survive." Robert poured himself another glass of red wine and said with a grin. "But, I know, it sounds ridiculous, but I still believe that he won't die so easily." Robert smiled as he leaned back on the chair with one leg on his other leg. At this moment, the road on the north side of the balcony lit up, and the sound of a car engine from afar got closer. Robert put his hands on the chair, stood up in a slightly dizzy state, and pointed to the stairs. "I'll go and have a look below." As he said this, he walked downstairs. Because Nick was worried about Robert, he put down his glass and followed. When he walked to the hallway, he heard high heels step on the ground, and soon there was a knock on the door. "Let me guess who it is this time." "No need to guess, you can't guess it, although I can probably guess who it is." Robert took a deep breath and practiced a surprised expression on his face just before he opened the door, and then changed his expression back soon after. "Oh. Jennifer, why are you back?" Robert looked at the woman who stood at the door in surprise, as if he was really surprised. Jennifer bit her lower lip and lowered her head, her blonde hair blocked her eyes that turned red. "I thought about it for a long time after I got home. I shouldn't have said those things to you." "Well, you really shouldn't have said those things to me." Robert smiled while he leaned on the door frame with his arm. "Then, will you forgive me?" Jennifer said nervously. "Certainly." The words sounded like a heavenly melody. Jennifer raised her head suddenly and looked at Roberts in surprise. She covered her lips and nose with her hands. "Robert, oh, sorry, I really am, you're too emotional, aren't you?" "Well. I never thought you would forgive me, can you lend me your shoulder a little bit?" Jennifer said with tears of excitement in her eyes. "Although I have never loved him. Even if I come back now, it is only for the sake of money." But at this moment, she looked at the man who opened the door, who she had betrayed before. For a second, her heart skipped a beat. When Nick, who stood behind Robert, saw the expression on Jennifer's face, he let out a sigh, turned around, and walked upstairs. He already knew what Robert would do. To be honest, he could use the word evil on his friend's attitude towards women. "I'm sorry I can't." The cry stopped abruptly, and the expression on Jennifer's face froze. "About 24 hours ago, I lent my shoulder to someone else, speaking of which, you should know each other." Robert smiled and revealed his white teeth. This is impossible, you must be lying to me. Robert turned around without saying anything and yelled towards upstairs. Miss Hathaway, your friend is at the door. Who? Jennifer. Why did you come? I remember that you and Robert already. Hathaway walked downstairs in sexy lingerie. When she saw Jennifer at the door, the expression on her face became slightly awkward. After all, she was the one who came to see Robert. Although it was after Jennifer broke up with him, being the girlfriend of her best friend's ex-boyfriend was not something to be proud of. It's okay, my baby, she and I are over. You came into my heart when I needed someone to comfort me the most. Before Jennifer could speak, Robert put his arm around Hathaway's waist. He stared into her eyes, as if no one else was around, and said affectionately. Robert, Hathaway was defeated by the sweet talk. Jennifer, who was at the door, trembled uncontrollably as her face became completely flushed. You bastard. After a long time, she gritted her teeth and squeezed a curse from between her lips. She turned around in tears and quickly ran away in devastation. 4 days ago. Jiang Chen, who left the subdimension, returned to the mansion in the fishbone base. He felt a lot of emotions flow through him when he saw the expanded holy shield in the sky. He almost couldn't make it back. He did not see Sun Jiao and the others in the mansion. After he turned on the interdimensional communication chip, there was only white flickers on the holographic screen. After he realized the seriousness of the problem, he rushed to the Lin Institute and found Lin's sister Lin Yi. After he learned that the neutrino tunnel was closed, he ordered the research institute to find the cause while he instructed Lin Yi to help Lilith build a new body. Just like that, about 3 days passed. The reason has been ascertained. The plane parameters experienced fluctuations, causing the portals on both sides of the neutrino tunnel to lose connection with each other. Plane parameters, fluctuation. Yes. Lin Yi nodded. Plane parameters are just a broad term. You can understand it as a reference point. After all, there are as many planes as there are sand in the desert. To find the unique one in the desert, one must use something as a reference. Under what circumstances will the plane parameters change? In theory, the plane parameters will not change, Lin Yi said. Then. This is what confuses me the most, Lin Yi pursed her lips and then said in a serious tone, in theory, even things from that world are moved to this world, it is only an increase of materials in the three-dimensional space. It's like applying different pigments on the surface of the sand, and it cannot change the structure of the sand itself, unless. It's just a speculation, you should have heard of M-theory, right? After she saw Jiang Chen nod, she continued. The universe is 11-dimensional, composed of vibrating planes, of which the 4 dimensions can be intuitively felt by us. Modern physics believes that there are still 7 dimensions that we cannot feel but exist objectively. So what? A substance that exists in the 11-dimensional universe, or should be described with another terminology. In short, this kind of substance directly constitutes the universe itself. If we are all things in a house, then it is what is used to build a house, like bricks. So, I pried a brick on this house now, right? Jiang Chen said while he sweated. A brick is too much of an exaggeration, it should be just a nail-sized ash, huh? Did you do it? Lin Yi looked at Jiang Chen in surprise. Jiang Chen fell silent. After he recalled the conversation with the ghost in the void, he suddenly understood what the golden gravel he found in the subdimension was. You are really lucky. You have found something by luck that a higher civilization, known as the Type 3 civilization of the Kardashev scale in your comprehension, is using and used it on yourself. You will understand. Lin Yi reached out and waved her hand in front of his eyes. What are you thinking about? After Jiang Chen recollected his thoughts, he looked at Lin Yi. Nothing. Is there a solution? It's not too difficult. You only need to modify the neutrino vibration frequency of the portals on both sides. Can you go back to the modern world? I will give you a detector and recollect the plane parameters over there. Jiang Chen breathed a sigh of relief after he heard this. If he was asked to return the mysterious substance, he would be completely lost on how to do it. Although that matter was in his subdimension, he would have no idea how. For the past 3 days, he attempted multiple times to emerge his consciousness into the subdimension to touch that golden gravel, but all his attempts failed without exception. However, there were new problems. Do I have to go back there? Jiang Chen asked with an awkward expression. Of course, do you have a way to avoid it and transfer the detector over? Lin Yi asked rhetorically. I might, it's not convenient to go back. Why? What did you do over there? Lin Yi frowned. Jiang Chen's expression was slightly subdued as he hesitated before he finally decided to answer truthfully and looked aside embarrassedly. Before I left, I blew apart Mars. In the end, Jiang Chen managed to return to the modern world. After he sat inside a titanium alloy spherical detector about 2 centimeters thick, with a graviton shield on the outside, Jiang Chen traveled back to the modern world with his breath held. After he quickly sent a message to Lin Lin, he went back to the apocalypse. Actually, he was too careful. Planets were not stars after all. After the explosion, Mars became only a fragmented asteroid belt, and there was not any immediate danger to it. Lin Yi collected the updated coordinates and readjusted the output frequency of the neutrino tunnel in the apocalypse. Lin Lin received Jiang Chen's text message and hurriedly opened the portal on Coconut Island. With the simultaneous activation of the 2 portals, the bridge between the 2 worlds was finally rebuilt. Jiang Chen, who walked out of the portal, was received by a figure that dashed into his arms and almost knocked him back into the portal. Jiang Chen hugged Aisha and gently held up her pretty face that was covered in tears. When he looked into her teary red eyes, he only felt a tremendous amount of guilt. It was the first time that he saw such a fragile expression on Aisha's face. You promised me. Didn't I come back? Jiang Chen rubbed her chestnut hair, smiled softly, looked at the girls, and said apologetically, Sorry, I worried you. Don't apologize to me, Xia Shiyu, whose index finger was wrapped around her hair near her temple, whispered quietly as she said with her eyes red, and unwilling to show the soft side of herself. As long as you're back safely, she added as she looked away. Speaking of which, where is Sun Jiao? Jiang Chen couldn't help being a little surprised when he didn't see Sun Jiao here. Xiaoro, who stood by the door, rolled her eyes when she heard this sentence. Is brother-in-law a fool? Huh. My sister is carrying a baby in her belly. How could she be allowed to come here? What if she is too excited and hurts the baby in her belly? Xiaoro sighed with a defeated expression on her face. Qian Xia has already stopped her. You should go and see her yourself. It made sense. With Sun Jiao's personality, she would definitely dash into Jiang Chen's arms faster than Aisha. Did you really blow up Mars? Lin Lin, on the side, looked at Jiang Chen with an expression of disbelief. Yes. This is too crazy. If there was a better choice, I would also like to use a cheaper, less pricey way, but unfortunately, I'm not a god. Jiang Chen sighed. As for the impact on the Earth after the explosion of Mars, these questions would be left to the future. After a pause, Jiang Chen looked at Lin Lin and continued. Speaking of which, after blowing up Mars, it seems that something special has been sucked into my subdimension. What is it? Lin Lin was slightly taken aback. It seems to be something that constitutes the origin of the universe, the things that exist in the 11th dimension. These are all what your sister told me, and I am not very sure myself. Attending one's own funeral was not something he randomly decided to do. The Earth Federation required a flag to unite everyone. And a dead Jiang Chen was far more valuable in this respect than a living Jiang Chen. If he died, then all of his blemishes in history would be written off, and all his past acts of war that were criticized by the international community would be reinterpreted as positives. After all, others could not interpret a man who sacrificed himself for the entire humankind, even at the cost of a blown-up Mars, as selfish based on his past actions. He could just see farther than everyone else and understood more deeply the meaning of war between civilization and civilization. Of course, these would be left for the historians a century later. On the second Friday after the explosion of Mars, that was, on the last day of May 2026, the Earth Federation was officially established at the headquarters of the Earth Defense Alliance in Coro City. In fact, this just happened, because just a week ago, high-ranking officials and dignitaries from different countries left here on SS Origin, and the dissatisfaction of the abandoned people had reached the breaking point until the day before the founding of the Earth Federation. Some countries were still in a state of anarchy, or near anarchy. Although some countries tried to hold an election or select a transitional government, it did not produce any good results. Because of the boarding list, the credit of governments around the world had reached the lowest point in history. The most crucial factor was that no one wanted to experience the fear before the arrival of doomsday. From now on, cooperation between countries were no longer limited to space and military. Political, economic, and cultural were also included in the scope of cooperation. Countries were no longer separated, and there was only one flag left in the solar system, with the Earth drawn in the shape of a half-moon. The blue-bottomed Federation flag was raised in the square in front of the Federation building amidst applauses. More than 160 countries became signatory states of the Earth Federation, and the remaining 30 countries and regions that had yet to join were designated as reserved areas. Most of these countries lacked in development or had remained in a state of anarchy for a long time. Some were in civil wars, or they didn't even know what was happening in the outside world. These countries and regions were mostly concentrated in north-central Africa, scattered on the Korean peninsula, and from West Asia to the Balkan Peninsula. After the establishment of the Earth Federation, strict military restrictions were imposed on these countries, and all weapons of mass destruction such as nuclear, biological, chemical were banned, and enforcement rights were reserved. Not only that, the rare earth elements needed for the development of the military industry and modern electronics industry were also strictly restricted. On the economic level, the World Union Reserve conducted mergers and acquisitions of central banks of each country, and the world dollar became the only currency in the world that circulated among 160 participating states. The BIT Spirit monitored the global economic data in real time and formulated monetary policies in line with actual conditions. The Federation election was to be held on the last day of next month. Before the president was elected, the local councils of the Federation districts would be elected to formulate local policies. Then, the local councils would prepare for referendum elections in accordance with the Federation law, and based on the population base, industry strength, economic aggregate, and other indicators, they would elect 1 to 10 members to represent the local council in the Federation Assembly. When the local councils and the Federation Assembly were established, they would then elect the Federation President. All regions of the Federation would pledge allegiance to the Federation Constitution and draft local laws on the basis of the Federation Constitution. It would take 1 to 2 years, based on a conservative estimate, to complete the series of procedures. It was very complicated to reunite people of different skin colors, different races, and different cultures to form a new country compared with chanting a slogan of, "The solar system belongs to all humankind." But fortunately, after people experienced the fear of doomsday, their optimism about the future of the Earth Federation was enough to tolerate all the obstacles on this path. After all, it was the only way to survive. The Federation election term began with the direct election of the second president. As the hero who saved the entire Earth civilization, the Earth Federation Provisional Committee unanimously decided to grant Jiang Qin the titles of the First Federation President and the First Federation Fleet Commander. There were also rumors that Kelvin also proposed to build 2 bronze statues at the entrance of the Federation building, one to commemorate the disappearance of the 4th planet of the solar system, and the other to commemorate the great man who saved civilization from danger. Of course, this proposal was not brought to the round table of the interim committee for discussion. As for the reason, it was naturally because of Jiang Qin himself. To be honest, I'm really surprised. How did you survive that explosion? After Kelvin confirmed that it was Jiang Qin who stood in front of him, and not a doppelganger, Kelvin's jaw dropped from that moment on and did not close anymore. Since then, a lot of things happened. I am afraid that it will take more than 2 days and 2 nights to tell you everything. Jiang Chen sat down in front of Kelvin's desk, sighed softly, and then said, "So, what has happened since I've been gone?" "We held a funeral for you and the 2,400 soldiers who died in battle, established the Earth Federation on the basis of the alliance, rebuilt the Federation fleet, formed the Earth Federation Provisional Committee, and sent peacekeeping troops to unstable regions, and there was the establishment of an asset liquidation committee." "What is that?" Jiang Chen asked. "To liquidate the assets of passengers on SS Origin. They left a huge mess after they decided to leave. Many large companies lost their legal representatives, and more than $600 billion of assets have been left in bank accounts. If we don't properly handle these remaining issues, we'll probably be defeated by ourselves before we are defeated by Harmony." When Kelvin explained, his expression revealed much frustration. It was obvious that he was not very proficient in dealing with these matters. "We can talk about these things later, I'm just asking nonchalantly. The reason I came here today was mainly to ask for your opinion on another matter." Jiang Chen leaned back against the chair while he said this, and his sight remained on Kelvin. Kelvin was unaware of what Jiang Chen wanted to ask, so he was zoned out for a second, then he said. "Please go ahead. About the candidate for the first Federation president. Isn't it you?" Kelvin smiled. "I mean the second one. Not that kind of useless honorable title, but a Federation president in the true sense." Jiang Chen smiled slightly as he looked at Kelvin. "Are you interested?" Kelvin held his breath. For an instant, countless complex expressions flashed in his eyes. The silence lasted for a long time in the office. Finally, a light sigh broke the silence. Those complex emotions faded from Kelvin's pupils, and he closed his eyes and shook his head gently. "I'm not suitable for this job. If you are asking for my personal opinion, of course, I would prefer to stay in Celestial Trade Space Department. But if you already made a decision, why bother asking me?" After Jiang Chen heard Kelvin's response, he smiled and got up from the chair. "I always have to ask the employees for their opinions." After a pause, Jiang Chen put on a serious expression, stared into Kelvin's eyes, and continued. "From today, you will be the CEO of Celestial Trade, and Celestial Trade will, as an enterprise, have a seat as a member in the Earth Federation. In this case, the total number of seats held by Xian will reach 11, and the other committee representatives will not agree." Kelvin seemed to be troubled by this decision. It was okay when Jiang Chen was the executive before, but now with Jiang Chen gone, as the interim executive, he finally realized how difficult the committee members were. However, his boss obviously did not take his difficulties to heart. "Persuade them, this is my task for you. By the way, the appointment letter will be issued in the form of an electronic file announcement through Celestial Trade's database, and we will probably communicate through that in the future. You can do it, I have full trust in you." After Jiang Chen patted the bewildered Kelvin on the shoulder, he laughed and then left the office. In a week's time, SS Origin had passed through the orbit of Saturn. The central computer had calculated the best route to Alpha Centauri. After the warp engine was fully engaged, SS Origin was expected to arrive at Alpha Centauri in 50 years. Elites from Earth civilization would use the colonization equipment on board SS Origin to rebuild the glory of Earth civilization in that strange and distant galaxy. As for whether one day they could come back to the solar system and retake the home planet from the hands of those bugs, it was something that could only be determined a few centuries later. "Good drink, it's just too spicy, what's its name?" "Mutai," the old man smiled lightly as he said in a quiet voice, "It's like vodka to Russia. In our country, this kind of alcohol has become a culture." Although they were both elites of Earth civilization, it did not mean everyone on the SS Origin was equal. Where there are people, there are classes. Major and minor member states, nuclear and non-nuclear countries, and even the nationality of the SS Origin crew members, these all directly determine the boarding list and the share of tickets allocated to each country or region, and the identity and status of the passengers. For example, Wang Dihai, who sat here at this moment. Based on the agreement before boarding, after SS Origin reached Alpha Centauri, passengers from different countries would establish colonies belonging to different countries on the Earth-like planets in the galaxy based on their previous nationalities. For example, the Russian colony would be the new Moscow, the Hua colony would naturally be New Shangjing. After Noah's Ark was docked, the nobles were still nobles, and the common people were still common people. Although the Wang family was on the decline in recent years, the power of the Wang family in Hua was still not to be underestimated, otherwise, he would not be here to chat and joke with a foreigner. As for the man who sat across from him, it was Michael Bloomberg from the UA. Bloomberg was also an incredible person. Born in a middle-class family in 1942, he became the mayor of Nouveau York in 2001. He was also the president of Bloomberg, with assets of more than $50 billion. Bloomberg was the equivalent of a success story of someone becoming successful from nothing. However, if he had to comment on his life, he was not most proud of defeating his political opponents to become the mayor, nor was he proud of his creation of Bloomberg, the leader of financial news and intelligence. Instead, it was that he turned all of the assets and funds into cash, and with a net worth of $50 billion world dollars, he bought this ticket from an arms dealer who was said to have had a relationship with Jiang Chen. He took his grandson, who was in his 20s, as well as his great-granddaughter who was less than 2 years old on this flight to Alpha Centauri. If it weren't for this, he wouldn't be here, tasting and laughing with the red nobleman from the east. Are you on the ship alone? I'm with my grandson and great-granddaughter. Bloomberg smiled and said softly, the ordinary ticket allows for an adult relative and a minor relative on board. Originally, I wanted to give the spot to my son, but he couldn't accept this kind of life. After I called him, he chose to commit suicide. Doomsday meant that decades of life experience, hardship, and effort to achieve the goal, as well as the goal in itself, became a ridiculous joke. There were already more than 1 million people who committed suicide because they could not accept this reality. Although compared with the population base of more than 8 billion people, these million people were only a drop in the bucket, but the people who died because of despair even exceeded despair itself. Sorry for asking this question. It's nothing. At my age, I'm actually over these things. Bloomberg's smile looked slightly desolate, as he gazed into the starry sky outside the window, which pointed to the direction of Earth. It's good that I can go see another world in my lifetime. Although the good sounded quite reluctantly. The Earth probably has fallen now. Wang Dihai stared at the darkness outside and let out a soft sigh. To be honest, I never thought there would be such a day. Perhaps because this brought back memories of the past, the two fell into a brief silence. Unfortunately, each person is only allowed to carry 10 kilograms of luggage. Are there any issues? Nothing. Survival is the most crucial element after all. It's just a pity to think of my art collection in the basement of my mansion in Los Santos. Bloomberg smiled, but the smile seemed weak and forced. I only hope those bugs don't eat them. It's hard to say what the oil paintings taste like, but the marble statues should not be nutritious, right? Then how did you deal with those collections in the end? After Wang Dihai took a sip of the alcohol from the porcelain cup, he looked at Bloomberg and said with a smile. I gave them all away. Gave them away. To the Los Santos man who sold me his ticket, Bloomberg smiled. Anyway, I can't take those arts away. If he intends to use those 50 billion to experience the feeling of being rich, then my collections may allow him to feel like the rich in a more realistic way. The two laughed simultaneously at this point. The news that Bloomberg bought the tickets for 50 billion world dollars became a well-known joke on the Origin starship. There was nothing more foolish than someone who exchanged the chance to live for a pile of useless paper. What are your plans after disembarking? The eldest son of the Loki family wants me to be their economic advisor. They plan to build a colony on Alpha Centauri C, and call it New Boston. At this point, Bloomberg paused for a moment and said with a smile. I don't have any further plans. No one can promise that our friendship will be maintained until the colony is built. That makes sense. Wang Dihai didn't deny it, and said with a smile, but allow me to be honest, the only people worthy of being our opponents are the Russians. When you joined the Earth Defense Alliance Euro, it was a bit late. Maybe, these things will become clear after we open our eyes. Bloomberg did not disapprove of the statement, instead, he just laughed it off. If the Alpha Centauri was rich in resources, it would be fine. If the planet was poor in resources, then the first thing they need to deal with would be their fellow humans who arrived at Alpha Centauri together. Almost everyone was conscious of this fact. They were the elites of human society. They followed the law of nature, that the fittest survive, more than anyone else. After all, they were the ones who survived natural selection. At this moment, a soft female voice rang above their heads. SS Origin will enter sublight speed in 30 minutes. The crew will remind you, please open the hibernation cabin, lie down flat with your hands rested beside your legs. The soft female voice repeated these instructions twice in 12 languages. When her voice stopped, Wang Dihai got up from the chair, downed the remaining alcohol in the cup, and put down the porcelain cup with force. Then, I wish you good luck. The same goes for you, God bless you. Bloomberg smiled and stood up, toasted Wang Dihai, and walked towards the corridor outside the door. Your subdimension can hold people now. It seems like it, unbelievable, but you don't need to wear a spacesuit. How do you breathe in it? Lin Lin was inside Jiang Chen's storage dimension in a spacesuit. Her small mouth was wide open because of shock, she said while she looked at Jiang Chen who was floating beside her. I don't know, Jiang Chen shook his head and said helplessly, maybe, because I am the master of this subdimension. Compared with when the subdimension was just formed, apart from the space becoming bigger, this spherical space did not change significantly. As for how he could stuff himself inside, how could living creatures be stored inside, it was impossible for him to understand such advanced topics with his undergraduate education. Just that instinct told him it was likely related to the golden yellow gravel-like substance. Where is that golden thing? It's there. Jiang Chen pointed towards the corner of the space. Lin Lin followed the direction Jiang Chen pointed at and she found the golden gravel in the corner of the subdimension. The air box behind whizzed, and under the boost of the gas jet, Lin Lin flew towards the golden gravel. When she flew next to it, she reached out and tried to touch it, but that golden gravel slipped away through the cracks between her fingers. Strange, Lin Lin muttered to herself as her index finger repeatedly tried to touch it, it's like a holographic projection, there is no resistance at all. Even I can't do anything about it. Jiang Chen sighed, shrugged helplessly, and moved to Lin Lin's side. What do you think? Do you have a clue? Countless tiny light particles floated around this group of golden matter. Upon closer inspection, the entire golden yellow matter seemed to be entangled with countless light particles. No matter if he tried to touch it with his hand, or anything else, this golden matter did not seem to exist in this world, as if it did not intersect with everything in this world. Is this the matter that got into your subdimension after Mars exploded? Lin Lin carefully examined the seemingly flowing lines on the surface of the light ball, as she was lost in thought. It should be after the explosion of Mars, before, when I took out the magnetic confinement device storing antimatter from the subdimension, there was no such matter in it. So, is the most crucial point that it happened after Mars exploded? That's right. Jiang Chen suddenly remembered something. What's wrong? I remember that after Mars exploded, I briefly entered the void. While in the void, the voice inside told me, that thing is only understood by a Type 3 civilization on the Kardashev scale. Level 3 civilization. The expression on Lin Lin's face was quite shocked. Based on the definition of the Kardashev scale, the scope of activity of the Type 3 civilization covered the entire galaxy. Even the Gaia civilization was only the pinnacle of Type I civilization, and it had just managed to pass the threshold of Level 2 civilization on the technical level. As for the current Earth civilization, although it seemed to have built colonies to Jupiter, in fact, there was still a big gap in the full utilization of the Earth's resources. Therefore, based on the Kardashev scale, the Earth civilization could only be described as barely touching the edge of Type I, based on Fermi's paradox, if such a civilization really did exist in the Milky Way, then humans would have encountered it a long time ago. Therefore, it was very likely that a Type 3 civilization had yet to be born in the Milky Way. But the ghost in the void did not tell these things to Jiang Chen. After Jiang Chen repeated what he heard in the void, he looked at Lin Lin, who lowered her head and became deep in thought. About 10 minutes later, Lin Lin shook her head. Have you considered a possibility? What possibility? Jiang Chen asked immediately. Don't get excited, this kind of speculation is without any scientific basis. Lin Lin's expression was a little embarrassed. The four-dimensional Klein particle decayed into a three-dimensional world that can be transformed into light and energy. Based on this idea, by analogy, what kind of effect will the unknown matter existing in the 11-dimensional world have if it decayed? An explosion? What explosion? Can you be a little bit imaginative? Lin Lin rolled her eyes at him, and after a soft cough, she continued, the decay from the 11-dimensional space to the 10-dimensional space, and then continue from the 10-dimensional space to a lower dimensional space, and the 1-dimensional space is also filled. The things created along the way are invisible to us, but they are all necessary elements to form a complete universe, that is to say. There was a look of realization that appeared briefly in Jiang Chen's pupils. The decay may have occurred, but from our perspective, it may not be visible. Lin Lin looked at the golden gravel and continued, if this inference is correct, then your subdimension is probably moving towards the transformation of a real universe. 20.5 light-years away, the half-emerald green and half-flesh red Gliese 581G floated quietly on its orbit, like a piece of unique artwork in the starry night. Under the emerald green leaves, there were entangled tubes, nutrients and heat were transferred from the tidal locked side to the dark side. There were large chunks of flesh-colored mass. The Harmony residents lived under the flesh-colored mass, and their bodies were filled with large and small tubes, like somatic cells connected in series by capillaries. Every individual was a cell in the gigantic behemoth. Once they entered into a fierce ground battle, no civilization could fare against them. Space warfare was not their area of expertise, but for the Earth civilization still in its infancy, it was not a difficult task to overcome. Except that, they did not expect the Earth civilization would win when they were guaranteed to be victorious. When the news of the defeat of the space colonization ship finally arrived, the entire planet was filled with shrill wailing. The Harmony civilization residents sent condolences to the soldiers who had not returned from the expedition. The scaly mutants living under the huge leaf bubble roared into the air and waved their sharp claws, as they expressed their desire for war and slaughter to the will of the mother nest with high spirits. However, in the next second, all mutants became quiet. Silence. The cold voice reverberated in the mind of every mutant. It was not any language, and there was not any text that could record it, but for the mutants, it was an imperial edict. The flesh-red mass began to squirm, and large clumps gathered toward the middle of the planet not facing the star. Suddenly, a bumpy human face grew out of the center of that planet. The eyes opened slowly. Those eyes stared motionlessly in the direction of the solar system. Even if it was very clear that the galaxy reflected in its pupils was nothing but the reflection emitted from more than 20 years ago, its line of sight still stayed on it. It was as if it tried to engrave everything about this planet into its mind. The expedition failed. There was not much frustration in its mind. The splitters began to lift off and send the organic matter to the skeleton on the synchronous orbit, and a larger space colonization ship was slowly taking shape. The contempt for Earth civilization was the main cause of failure. After all, based on their expectation, Earth would have just entered the first few years of the space age when they arrived. This would never happen again. This time, it would build a stronger fleet, allowing the endless swarms to devour the iron and steel of the Earth's civilization. The real war had just begun. If it weren't for the Asset Liquidation Committee, I wouldn't know that these people were so rich. Jiang Chen sat in the office as he flipped through the documents in his hands. When he saw the name Lu Xianghua, he couldn't help but smile as he shook his head. There were very few properties under the name of Lu Xianghua, only one old manor in Shangjing. But his children, grandchildren, and even relatives within 3 generations, if the total assets under their names were totaled together, their wealth could rival a nation. It was so exaggerated that the more distant the kinship, the scarier the net worth. For example, his niece's husband was the boss of a real estate developer in Hua. The company's market capitalization was in the hundreds of billions range, his own net worth was in the billions of dollars, and he possessed hidden assets worth tens of billions of dollars overseas. If it weren't for 3 factors, the formation of the Earth Federation, the powers of countries and regions had already been given to the Provisional Committee, and ghost agents fully cooperated with the Provisional Committee to investigate, the money would never have been discovered. Of course, everyone else was the same. How are you going to dispose of these assets? Aisha stood in front of Jiang Chen's desk and spoke softly. With fairness, Jiang Chen tossed down the stack of papers on the desk, stretched his arms on the chair, then squinted his eyes in a relaxed state before he looked out the window. Kelvin knows what to do, and the 8 billion people in the world who have been abandoned also need an explanation. SS Origin originally belonged to the Earth Fleet, but in the end, it did not fulfill its mission on the battlefield and instead, was used to help some people escape. Even if it was a compelling decision, even if it was the most sensible and logical choice. After all, a fight meant an inevitable death, but fleeing away meant at least preserving the last kindle of fire for Earth civilization. But now that the doomsday did not arrive, this behavior had naturally become a betrayal to all humankind. And it was a form of intolerable betrayal. After all, the list to board the ship was not determined by all humankind from the beginning. A small group of people used the privileges in their hands to decide that the people who survived were themselves and to let the rest of the 8 billion people die. After the establishment of the Earth Federation, it was natural that these people would be sentenced by the Federation Court. Based on the laws of the Earth Federation, 2,500 passengers and 500 crew members on SS Origin would be prosecuted by the Federation Court for treason, and the assets under their name would be returned to the Federation Treasury. The World Federation Reserve and its partner banks would list the assets for auction. This move certainly caused quite a backlash. After all, even the holders of these assets and the first-order heirs boarded the ship heading to Alpha Centaur, but based on the inheritance laws of different countries, there were always the second, third, and even fourth-order heirs to inherit these assets. However, these protests were of course invalid. The vast majority of people approved this decision of the Earth Federation, and there was no disagreement on this proposal within the Provisional Committee. After all, this decision revenged those who were left behind. In the second month of the establishment of the Earth Federation, more than a month passed since the Earth civilization survived the invasion of Harmony. During this more than a month time, Jiang Chen cooperated with Lin Lin to conduct all kinds of experiments on the golden light particles. However, the fact proved that it was too difficult to leapfrog and challenge the areas that were only understood by a Type 3 civilization. Even though the matter just stayed in the subdimension, Jiang Chen, as the owner of the subdimension, could not do anything with it. The only thing he knew was that the golden light particles were slowly changing his subdimension. Moreover, this change was benign. Because it was the matter produced after a planet exploded, so it was given a name called stardust. After all, those ethereal light particles were indeed like dust. Just like that, Lin Lin gave it a very casual name. Jiang Chen, who had put aside stardust, had completely freed himself of any responsibilities, and gave himself a long vacation. In the past 10 years of growth, the company structure of celestial trade became quite stable, with a clear division of responsibilities among the different departments, and strict checks and balances by the central computer, which drastically reduced a series of problems such as a department gaining too much power or internal corruption. Even if Kelvin, Ivan, and Zhang Yaping were the only 3 people that knew Jiang Chen was still alive, and the world thought he was no longer here and sacrificed himself for Earth civilization, he could still use the central computer's highest authority, or directly give orders through Lilith. So, it really did not make a difference whether he was there or not. Rather, the fact the whole world would forget him made him feel an unprecedented amount of ease. In the past, no matter what celestial trade did, the cameras of reporters from all over the world were immediately aimed at him. Politicians, entrepreneurs, and stakeholders around the world grilled him on the conference table as soon as possible. In the beginning, that kind of life was quite fresh. But honestly, he had enough. At the mansion on the north side of Coral Island, the corner of the marble wall was covered with emerald, green moss, as if it had been abandoned for a long time. Some people suggested that this should be used as the former residence of Jiang Chen, and the government should buy it and turn it into a museum, but this kind of proposal was eventually dismissed. With a sense of awe, residents generally did not approach this place. But today, a black car stopped at the gate of the mansion. "Come here to pick me up at 5 o'clock. After the old man finished this sentence, he closed the door. After the car drove away, he walked up and pressed the doorbell. The doorbell rang 3 times. The iron gate did not move. The old man sighed softly. He did not leave but just stood there. About 10 minutes later, there was a sound of a light click on the iron gate, which slowly opened the gate to both sides. A glimmer of joy flashed across the old man's face. He adjusted his collar and tie, then walked into the mansion along the stone brick road behind the wall. Loki felt emotional when he stood before the mansion. He looked at the closed red wooden door and said, "I know you aren't dead. Are you not going to invite your old friend in for a drink? Today is not the best day, I'm not at home." The sound came from the garden beside the stone brick road. Loki looked over there and saw a gardening drone hover next to him. 2 silver scissors were still stained with grass clippings. It was evident that the drone was in the backyard mowing the lawn. A hearty laugh came from the drone when Loki just stood there with a look of surprise on his face. After a momentary pause, Jiang Chen, who controlled the drone, said, "Besides my family and loved ones, now you are the 4th person to know that I am still alive. Go on and tell me how you plan to make me believe you that you will keep this a secret. This kind of promise is not necessary at all. If you don't believe me, you just need to use the scissors on the drones to get rid of me." Loki had a faint smile as he watched the gardening scissors on the drone. No one will hold the accountability of a dead person. Everyone will definitely think that it was an accident caused by the aging drone, due to the lack of maintenance. Really? But this will affect the reputation of future groups' drone products, so let's forget it. Jiang Chen laughed. Loki let out a sigh of relief when he heard Jiang Chen's words. If Jiang Chen really planned to get rid of him, then he would not care about the reputation of drone products at all. Since he could still use this saying as a joke, then Jiang Chen probably didn't care about the fact that he was still alive. Actually, when Loki decided to come today, it was a gamble on its own. Although he did not board SS Origin, the Beast City Consortium was on the list of the Asset Liquidation Committee. The Asset Liquidation Committee's explanation was very simple. Although Loki did not board SS Origin, the consortium was not comprised of the Loki family. There were also families including Kennedy, Adams, and even Loki's sons on SS Origin at this moment. And the most critical part was that these people received tickets to board the starship all because of their relationship to the Beast City Consortium. The Asset Liquidation Committee stated that Loki could retain assets under his own name, but the assets held by the Beast City Consortium and other family members would be confiscated. This decision was a death sentence to both Beast City Consortium and the Loki family. "I don't understand, why didn't you get on the ship? Don't tell me that you missed it." Inside his mansion on Coconut Island, Jiang Chen looked at the wrinkled face in the holographic screen and asked with a smile. "Except for me, everyone in the Loki family is already on board, including my wife." "Why?" "Because you said, I can live a long time." Jiang Chen was taken back for a second, then he laughed out loud. "Is it fun to laugh at an old man?" Loki said helplessly. No, Jiang Chen laughed and waved his hand. "I have just underestimated the attractiveness of an increased lifespan for ordinary people. But haven't you thought about it? If you stay, maybe you won't be able to survive even a week. So, my family thought I was crazy, and my wife even thought I got dementia." Loki sniffed, then narrowed his eyes and looked into the sky as he said with emotion, "I didn't really care at the time. Before they left, I entrusted the future of the Loki family to my eldest son. I believe he will lead the people who follow us to build a new home in Alpha Centauri. Jiang Chen did not deny what he said, nor did he comment, but just smiled instead. Sooner or later, the Earth Federation would bring Alpha Centauri into its territory. It could be after the final battle with Harmony, or it could be before. I only want to ask one thing here. Loki paused for a moment, then asked, is the deal between us still valid? About a few years ago, at a state banquet in Ecuador, Jiang Chen made a deal with Loki. As long as the Beast City Consortium was willing to help celestial trade take the lead in establishing the World Union Reserve, then Jiang Chen would give him an additional lifespan of at least 50 years. It depends on you, Jiang Chen said. What do you want me to do? Loki said respectfully. Well, there is nothing special you need to do. You just need to do a good job being the president of the World Union Reserve and cooperate with the Provisional Committee. Sooner or later, what should belong to you will belong to you. Jiang Chen smiled. That's all. Loki looked at the drone's camera in surprise. He originally thought that he would have to pay a certain price today, but he didn't expect Jiang Chen to give him a pass so easily. To be honest, if it were before, Jiang Chen could have been interested in biting a piece of meat off the Beast City Consortium. But now, what? The best way to describe this, the meat on the ant is too tiny to be bothered with. Earth Federation was already established, and he successfully went behind the scenes. Throughout the entire planet, there was no opponent worthy of him to seriously consider. Celestial Trade and Future Group were like two huge monsters that have contracted the future of all humankind in all aspects. As for the future of celestial trade, the destination was among the sea of stars light years away. Let me give you some suggestions, Jiang Chen said. Loki took a second to process the sentence, then hurriedly said with respectfulness. Please go ahead. While the DNA telomere extension medicine is still useful to you, hurry up and give yourself some airs. Jiang Chen laughed and leaned back on his chair. Don't wait until your time has come, and you won't have anyone to inherit your assets. Even if I crossed out your name from the list, your assets would still have to be confiscated in the end. 1. Loki didn't know what to say about Jiang Chen's suggestion. The Federation Assembly election was in the final stage, and the lifespan of the interim government was also in a final countdown. Just when those left behind were busy re-electing their own leaders, the space companies, led by Future Heavy Industries and Celestial Trade, under the organization of the Provisional Committee, began to rebuild the Earth fleet. There was a century left for the Earth civilization, but no one thought that it was a long time. After all, the task was not only to build the Earth fleet without a single battleship left, but the most critical shipbuilding yard had to be rebuilt. The once fiery red planet had turned into an asteroid belt. Both Heavenly Palace City and the spaceport were blown up with nothing left. Originally, Jiang Chen planned to build the planet into the largest industrial base in the solar system, and the second home of Earth civilization, but now this long-term plan had to be reconsidered. Fortunately, although Mars was gone, the mass itself did not disappear out of thin air. Except for some fragments accelerated to the third cosmic speed that could leave the solar system, most of the remaining fragments would eventually remain due to multiple factors such as mutual collisions and the influence of celestial gravity, just like the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars. That rich mineral resources could still be used on the star ships of the Earth fleet. On the second day of the birth of the Federation Assembly, 2 Seagull-class starships had simultaneously set off from the port of Celestial City and were headed for the fragmented planet wreckage. The first mission was to assess the damage of the antimatter bomb, and the other mission was to investigate the situation there. Based on the plan, Celestial Trade decided to select the largest asteroid in the asteroid belt and rebuild the spaceport. This time, the Earth civilization would no longer only invest in the resources of an enterprise, but the labor, material and research and development power of the entire Earth Federation. Jiang Chen firmly believed that the next battle with the Harmony civilization would definitely not be in the solar system, but in the distant Gliese galaxy. The Earth was saved. The Earth Federation was established. The Earth fleet was also reborn. His child was in Sun Jiao's belly, and in a few months, he would be a father. Jiang Chen thought for a while if he still had any regrets in this life, but he couldn't think of anything. He had been thinking about this question over the past few days. Whether in his life or in his career, he had reached the peak that people could accomplish. He was the majority shareholder of a trillion-dollar company, the first leader of the earth, and the man ruling the world behind the scenes. Millions of people were under his direct order, the fate of tens of millions of people were associated with his name, and the production and life of 8 billion people were closely related to him. Perhaps if he sneezed in the morning, the global financial market would experience turbulence the next day. Of course, it was just an exaggerated statement, since he was not wayward enough to be unreasonable. Lilith. What's wrong? Lilith, who stood next to Jiang Chen at the moment, looked very different from the flat-chested lowly from back then. Her long golden hair extended to her waist, and the front of the white t-shirt was stuffed full. She had turned into a stunning blonde who exuded hormones, which made people's hearts skip a beat the moment people saw her. If it was not for the emotionless face that did not change much, Jiang Chen could hardly match her name with Lilith. The reason for such an accident was mainly because Lilith strongly requested Lin Yi to design according to her ideas when she created the new body. In her original words, since we have to make a new one anyway, why not make it look better? So, its appearance now was this. What do you think I still lack? Jiang Chen asked. Why do you want to ask such a strange question? Lilith turned her head around to look at Jiang Chen, then Lilith replied in the same expressionless state, isn't this something only you know? Well, human beings don't like to do everything themselves. Including thinking. I don't deny it, Jiang Chen said with a smile. Lilith fell into silence as if she was carefully processing that thought. Just when Jiang Chen thought she was going to go play games without saying a word, she suddenly said. Speaking of which, you haven't held a formal wedding, right? Wedding. Speaking of which, I really owe them a wedding. Especially Sun Jiao. Since her belly was bulging day by day, and if this matter continues, the wedding would have to be delayed until after she gave birth. Lilith's words reminded Jiang Chen. He once promised to marry them with the grandest wedding in the world, and then use his entire life to protect their happiness. This sentence sounded shameless, but it was indeed the truest feeling in his mind. It was likely impossible to host the wedding in the modern world since he was already dead. For a dead person to crawl out of the grave to attend his own wedding was probably more shocking than a living person attending his own funeral. In order to avoid all kinds of troubles, and to keep the media that finally lost interest at bay, Jiang Chen specifically consulted Xia Xiyu, Aisha, and Natasha about where to hold the wedding. Fortunately, they were all reasonable people. I'm fine with anywhere, as long as I'm with you. I'm yours already. So, you can make the arrangement. Holding a wedding in the apocalypse? That sounds interesting. Those were Aisha, Xia Xiyu, and Natasha's response in respective order. As for Sun Jiao, Xiao, Yao Yao, and Lin Lin, the apocalypse was where they came from. Although the modern world was much more prosperous than the apocalypse, they preferred the apocalypse a little. So, the location of the wedding was finally determined to be in the apocalypse. You're getting married? Aha! What are you laughing at? As Jiang Chen looked at Lu Yao, who suddenly burst out laughing, he turned around and looked at the side of her face. I'm thinking. You just attended your own funeral, and now you are going to attend your own wedding. Wouldn't it be too weird? Lu Yao turned to look at Jiang Chen with a smile that looked gorgeous but feeble. Also, those who think you are dead will be so surprised that their jaw will drop. Lu Yao still remembered that at the time, she was in black clothes and stood in the corner of the cemetery with tears. She was then spotted by Xia Xiyu and was brought here by her. When she saw Jiang Chen in front of her, smiling, she seemed to have lost herself for a moment, and almost fainted out of excitement. It took her an entire day to slowly accept the reality that Jiang Chen was still alive. Before she came to Koro Island, Lu Yao took a long break from her production company. After Jiang Chen invited her to stay for a few days, she agreed without much consideration. Although they had never seen this strange woman, Sun Jiao and the others had a friendly attitude towards Lu Yao. In addition, they knew exactly what kind of person Jiang Chen was. After more than a month, the relationship between Lu Yao and the girls gradually became closer. It was just that she could feel that it was hard for her to integrate into their world. What made her the most uncomfortable was that this sense of distance did not stem from someone's exclusion, but simply because they accompanied him and experienced things that she never did, or could even imagine. This feeling of being left alone made her feel a little jealous. Jiang Chen smiled when he heard the Na Square Root of statement. If you let others know that I'm still alive, I'm afraid their jaws won't drop in surprise, but rather, they won't be able to sleep out of fear. He was well aware of this. Only those who had passed could gain the awe of the people from the bottom of their hearts and mystify his existence. After all, deep down, people only longed for a dead saint, not a living emperor. They won't know, Jiang Chen said. How is it possible? Lu Yao shook her head, then said with a smile, unless, you don't invite anyone to your wedding. But a wedding that no one knows, what's the point? She was smiling, but tears rolled down her face uncontrollably. She had endured it for a long time. But, after all, she couldn't control her feeling anymore. Jiang Chen saw her tears, then turned silent. The quiet atmosphere lasted for about half a minute between the two. In the end, it was Jiang Chen who broke the silence. There is one thing I haven't told you. I don't want to know. Lu Yao shook her head and her smile was a little haggard. I just want, before you get married, can you promise me one thing? I promise you. There was a look of surprise on Lu Yao's face. Are you not going to ask what it is? It'd be too rude to refuse my woman. As Jiang Chen gazed into her black pupils filled with surprise, excitement, and rolling tears, he smiled and gently wiped the teardrops beneath her eyes, going back to the topic just now, that thing I haven't told you. That thing must be, really important. You're correct. After all, that's my biggest secret. As he gazed at the teary Lu Yao, he smiled and offered an invitation. Do you want to go and take a look with me? The instant Lu Yao stepped through the portal, she felt like her perception of the world had been shattered. The dim yellow dome shrouded the entire city and towering buildings that pierced into the clouds were connected together. Although the charred windows and broken walls did not suggest anyone lived there, it was still possible to see through the ruins how prosperous this place used to be. Did an earthquake happen here? Lu Yao said, in a state of daze. Something more serious than an earthquake happened. Jiang Chen smiled at Lu Yao who was in a sluggish state and said when he looked at the tall buildings in the distance. You can't tell right, but this is Wanghai. Although it is Wanghai a century from now. Lu Yao was stunned. Her beautiful pupils widened with shock and disbelief was written all over her face. This is Wanghai. Everything she saw before her eyes were beyond her imagination. It took a while for her to digest the huge amount of information as she twisted her stiff neck and looked at Jiang Chen blankly. That means, yes, Jiang Chen nodded and said with a smile, most of the technology of Future Group comes from here, or is developed based on here. So, don't consider me as great, I'm just standing on the giant's corpse. Don't say that. Ordinary people can't bring the giant back to life even if they are standing on the giant's corpse. A sweet voice came from behind, and it was Xiaoro in a lavender dress. She walked to the side of Jiang Chen with a smile. If it was someone else, they might not be able to do it. Lu Yao didn't notice what Xiaoro had just said, because her attention at the moment had been completely captured by this strange world. As if she was in a dream, everything here was beyond her imagination. Lu Yao watched the soldiers that walked by in a row and asked in a daze. What are those people doing? If it was before, they would probably be on duty, but now, they should be rehearsing. When he said this, the expression on Jiang Chen's face was slightly embarrassed. His subordinates were so enthusiastic. After they heard that the general was going to be married, everyone from the general's mansion to the field officers seemed to be completely energized. They were so excited every day and had nowhere to vent their energy. Every day, when there was nothing to do, they would go out to rehearse, and it was grander than the military parade. Rehearsal? Lu Yao looked at Jiang Chen with confusion in her eyes. Because of the wedding, Jiang Chen said. Lu Yao was slightly depressed when she heard the word wedding. She opened her mouth, but in the end, she closed it again as she swallowed back the words that rushed to her. Xiao sensibly noticed the hesitation on Lu Yao's face was because of herself, so she smiled and turned away wittily. As Lu Yao watched Xiao's back as she walked away, she sensed the silence that lingered between the two of them and said softly. You promised me one thing, I want. She bit her lower lip lightly, lowered her head because of the unspeakable words, and said with a voice that was so weak that it was almost inaudible, give me a child. Don't get me wrong. I didn't mean that. I will raise him up by myself, I won't use him to trouble you, I just want to. When she finished the sentence, it exhausted Lu Yao's strength. She knew that her request was excessive, and it could even be said to be unreasonable. When she said it, she was prepared to be rejected. After all, she knew very well that her identity was just his mistress, and things like illegitimate children have always been accompanied by endless troubles. I reject. Although she expected that he would say that, she couldn't stop the tears from rolling out of her eyes. She lowered her head, in an attempt to block her eyes with her bangs, as she suppressed the sadness that was about to overwhelm her. Then she whispered in a trembling voice. Why? Because I am a greedy person, I can't change this terrible quality about me. Jiang Chen sighed softly, I have a hunch that if I promise you, you may leave me forever. Is that not good? Lu Yao looked at Jiang Chen, and her eyes that could speak seemed to ask Jiang Chen. Of course it's not good. Jiang Chen rubbed her hair, then gently lifted her face covered in tears. He gazed into the misty eyes before a smirk suddenly appeared at the corner of his mouth. What's more, after I let you see my secrets, do you think I will let you go? The tears seemed to rush out like a waterfall and turn the beautiful eyelashes wet. Happiness came so suddenly that it exceeded Lu Yao's expectations. She dove into Jiang Chen's chest, as joyous tears rolled down her cheeks. The beautiful and pristine teeth sunk into Jiang Chen's shoulder, as if she wanted to return the grievances and sorrows she experienced for the past few days. From the choked-up voice, she squeezed out intermittent words. You, bad person. Inappropriate wording. With the feeling of heat rolling down his neck, as well as the pain from his shoulder, Jiang Chen cracked a grin, then gently placed his hands behind Lu Yao's back and reminded softly. The word devil is more appropriate. From the beginning of preparations to the formal implementation, this wedding preparation already took more than a month. Although Jiang Chen himself did not mean to be extravagant, it was obviously impossible for him as the NAC general to keep a low profile on this matter. Especially Jiang Chen's subordinates. They worried about his wedding more than he himself. Since a month ago, preparations had been in full swing, and they even specially renovated the Century Auditorium in downtown Wanghai, as well as the nearby streets that had not had time to be renovated. It was rumored that before the war, this was the place where the Pan-Asia Cooperation Economic Forum was held. Therefore, after the outbreak of the war, this place was specifically taken care of by missiles and artilleries. However, the NAC engineering team took less than half a month to renovate this place. Through the wasteland, the ridiculous efficiency was only possible in the hands of the NAC engineering team. The preparation of the materials needed for the wedding ceremony was personally handled by Wang Qing, the Minister of Logistics. The pearls to decorate the wedding dresses were shipped from the outpost town on the west coast of North America. The diamonds on the diamond rings came from the South African Union Diamond Mine. The red carpet was taken from the fluff of the mutated blood lion. The utensils and tableware on the wedding table were all made out of pure silver, even the tablecloth on the dining table was made of fine Balinese yarn. Not only that, but Wang Qing also instructed the craftsmen in the 6th Street to use fine velvet and exquisite wood to create a bed with a width of 12 meters and to make matching bedding for Jiang Chen. In order to move it into the mansion, the bed had to be splitted into 12 parts and a wall had to be taken down. As for the purpose of the bed, just by looking at the length, it goes without saying. Apart from it being luxurious and extravagant, Jiang Chen couldn't find a more suitable word to describe this wedding. When he went to see Wang Qing and asked if it was too much, he got this answer. It's not an exaggeration at all. You are the general of NAC, and your wedding is the wedding of the entire NAC. You represent not only yourself, but also the entire new Pan-Asia cooperation. Wang Qing looked at Jiang Chen, who had sought her opinion, and the corner of her mouth curled up as she winked playfully. What's more, without a grand wedding, how can you be worthy of your 7 beautiful wives? The busy and tiring month came to an end. Finally, it was the day of the wedding. Today was a good day. The sky was clear, and there was not a trace of depressive radiation clouds in the distance. The holy shield was temporarily closed, and the bright sunlight poured down without reservation. It bathed this reborn city and every face living inside. Since early morning, the fireworks over Wanghai did not stop. People took to the streets and gathered in front of the square early. Everyone's face was filled with the same excitement and emotion, as well as different curiosity and longing. The enthusiasm in people's hearts was like an indistinguishable flame, and in front of the wide square, they waved flags of different sizes and waited for their hero. They had been looking forward to this day for too long. Now, it was finally here. The first thing that marched through the square was a power armor formation. The bright steel plates, under the sunlight, reflected dazzling rays. The steps were uniform, their rifles were held in front of their chest, and their eyes were focused straight ahead. The sound of steel boots marching through resounded in the open square like the roar of a monster and echoed in the mind of every viewer. After the power armor phalanx, it was the NAC tank force. The torrent of steel drove across the flat road, and the rumbling of the tracks over the concrete pavement was like a mighty and majestic accompaniment. Is this a military parade or a wedding? God, where did these Asians get so many power armors? Wait, there are tanks and planes. There was a surprised exclaim from the foreign guests. The people who stood there included chiefs from Africa, people from the east coast of North America, and even some people from distant Western Europe. Those exclamations did not last long and were soon drowned in even more deafening cheers. The black extended limo appeared in the center of the formation. The power armors that belonged to the General's Guard marched on both sides in a neat and organized formation. When the window of the car was lowered, the face that no one would be unfamiliar with, appeared in the eyes of everyone for a glimpse. The mighty army was immediately taken away from the limelight. People frantically waved the flag in their hands, with cheers, applause, whistles, all the voices that could express the excitement in their hearts as they sent the highest respect to His Majesty the General. The reason for NAC's prosperity today was because of his existence. Only he was worthy of this honor. Colorful pieces of flakes fell from the sky. Inside the extended limo, Jiang Chen waved and smiled at the crowd of excited and happy faces through the open window. Still longing for more, he had to roll down the car window at the end of the square. The wedding convoy departed from the square in the 6th Street and escorted by the General Guards, it went through the most crowded streets and headed to the Century Auditorium in city center. More than 2,000 guests were invited to the wedding, half of whom were senior and important figures of NAC, and the other half were from overseas colonies and other large survivors' settlements. Only the Century Auditorium could accommodate 2,000 people to dine at the same time without being crowded. It was a bit regretful that no parents were present. However, Jiang Chen promised Xia Shiyu that he would hold a special wedding just for her in the modern world to fulfill the wishes of their parents. Except that when it was the time, it would still take some time to explain to Xia Shiyu's parents why he was still alive. The convoy stopped at the entrance of the auditorium. Jiang Chen, who got off the limo, took Sun Jiao's hand, and together with the girls, they stepped onto the red carpet that extended from the inside of the auditorium to the stairs outside, into the magnificent auditorium. The wedding officially commenced. The earnest priest stepped forward and asked Jiang Chen in a solemn tone. "Are you willing to love her, comfort her, respect her, and protect her as you love yourself. Whether she is sick or healthy, rich or poor, fulfill your vows until you leave this world. I do. The moment that sentence was uttered, there was thunderous applause in the auditorium, and the orchestra played the wedding march. Under the bell of blessing, Jiang Chen put on rings for his women. When the ceremony concluded, the master of ceremonies offered blessings to the newlyweds, wishing Jiang Chen and his wives a happy marriage, a harmonious life, and a healthy family. Finally, amidst applause, the newlyweds walked towards the back of the auditorium and started their honeymoon. The wedding ceremony was reaching the end, but the banquet had just started. Delicious and grand food filled every round table, and the fragrance of wine lingered around the nose of every guest. Glasses clinked as the guests frequently toasted and bumped into each other and offered blessings to the general, to the great and glorious new Pan-Asia cooperation, and discussed in excitement whether the child in the Mrs. General's first lady belly was a boy or a girl. In the lounge behind the auditorium. The newlyweds who just finished the ceremony would take a rest here and return to the banquet later. Aisha enjoyed the heartfelt joy at this moment, examined the diamond ring on her hand, and a smile emerged on her face. I feel that we're connected. Next to her, Yao Yao and Lin Lin sat together at the moment and their faces flushed as they looked at the ring on their finger. Tonight is going to be the night. I feel a little nervous. So is Lin Lin, right? Huh. I'm not nervous, it's not like that, we haven't slept together before. Well, that was different. It must feel different. On the other side, the corner of Jiang Chen's mouth curled up when he looked at Sun Jiao in wedding gown. It is said that newlyweds need to have a new home. Do we need to move to a new place? I don't want to. Sun Jiao shook her head. Why? Because. There was a look of heartfelt happiness on Sun Jiao's face as she looked at Jiang Chen with joy. She was about to speak, but her sister spoke first. Xiaoro hugged her sister from behind, put her chin against her shoulder, looked at Jiang Chen as she smiled, and said the unfinished words for her sister, because don't you think that place is full of the memories shared between us? Makes sense. A knowing smile appeared on Jiang Chen's face. Everything started from there, and it would end there. It couldn't be better. Wait, no. It seemed strange to say that. After all, there were still hundreds of years, even thousands of years, waiting for him. To use the word end was too far-fetched. Fortunately, with them accompanying him, he would not be bored in the future. The wedding reached its conclusion, and night gradually died down. This night was still very long. And Jiang Chen's happy life had just begun.